Thank you. Testing, testing.
Take the hand is away.
Turn that on. Good morning. Please find a seat. We're going to get going right at 9 o'clock. Yeah, I know. All right, we're just waiting for the last couple of people to filter in. The room got sort of this deathly silence, so Nancy over here was like, say something. Just say something. Did everyone get a donut? Did everyone see the donut wall? Yeah. If you didn't, you missed out.
That's the reason to register, not go online.
Right. Oh, no, we actually mailed donuts to everyone who registered, and we emailed them a donut recipe. Well, good morning, and welcome to MITRE. Thank you for joining us for our first ever ATT&CKcon conference, which is dedicated to sharing information about and fostering the community around MITRE's attack framework. I'm Rich Struess, and I direct MITRE's cyber threat intelligence strategy, along with an amazing group of researchers and engineers. And I'm pleased to be your host for the next 2 days. So you're stuck with me. We should just try to get along. So in addition to the about 250 people who are joining us here in McLean today, I'd also like to acknowledge the over 1,700 people around the world who've registered for the live stream. So thanks for joining us, whether you're here or you're somewhere around the world. Now, since MITRE publicly released ATT&CK in 2015, a lot of things have happened. A lot of things have changed. I'm sure many of you, I talked to some people here earlier who were sort of there at the inception of ATT&CK. And as we're putting this conference together, we decided to look back and have a little fun. So we took the last 3 years and, using MITRE technology, compressed them into 90 seconds. So the goal of this event is really pretty simple. We want to foster the community that's grown up around ATT&CK, this community, making it easier for defenders and hopefully in the process making it harder for the adversary. To that end, we've assembled a really pretty amazing lineup of speakers over the next 2 days, people who will be sharing how they use attack, what they've learned, and also where they want to see it go from here. Our speakers represent a really broad array of organizations and geographies, and really that diversity is a key part of the strength of this community. It's also exciting that we have both end users of attack and side by side with vendors that are incorporating attack into their products and services. Speaking of vendors, I'd like to thank all of our exhibitors who are here today. There are many different companies that are incorporating attack into their security offerings. And while we're thrilled that they're here, we, of course, MITRE does not endorse any specific products or services. Now, to get going, we have a few housekeeping items that they told me if I didn't read, I would be fired. So first of all, ATT&CKcon is being live streamed. So what this means is you're probably going to be on camera. So either, fix your hair or stand up straight or turn around or whatever floats your boat. But please be aware of that. We're also taking photos, which we're going to be posting up on social media and the website and someone's Instagram account probably. So speaking of social media, please feel free to tweet using the hashtag ATT&CKcon with an A, not an ampersand. If you're here in McLean, please wear your lanyard and badge at all times. Please pay attention to security so they don't have to pay attention to you. They are here to help us all stay where we should be. Trust us, you really don't want to wander around. Restrooms are if you're here in McLean, restrooms are in the area outside the auditorium. If you're watching on the live stream, you're kind of on your own. In the unlikely event of an emergency, here are the emergency exits. If you need a place to have a quiet phone call or a conversation, downstairs by the registration desk, there is a number of little rooms you can use. And if you need anything, the registration staff will be happy to help you. If you're looking for MITRE staff that actually work on attack, look for the red dot on the badge, and we'll be happy to try to help you. And finally, please be sure to silence your cell phones. And with that, I am now pleased to welcome MITRE's Senior Vice President for Programs and Technology, Rich Byrne.
Oh, welcome. 2,000 people, live and virtual. That's quite a momentous gathering, and I believe we're going to be looking back someday and saying this was an inflection point of how we look at cyber differently. I mean, going back, it's kind of interesting to see what it used to be like. I can remember back in the days when you probably remember these days when the only people talk about cybersecurity were these low whispers in dark corners of dungy little IT rooms and et cetera, right? But now, who talks about it? Every boardroom and every company is having these debates. We have heated arguments in government about, well, what are you going to do about cybersecurity? And even any critical mission that we have, that word cybersecurity starts going in. So we are front and center. This community is in front and center of all the leadership in every different area. And when you think about it, some of you, there's so many new people here, 2,000 people. A lot of you have been here for a long, long time. Some of you have been here very new. I was talking to Gary Gagnon, our CSO and lead for our cyber strategy. And we were going back to what, when it was years ago, some of the things we used to say, well, why would people want to be interested in this? And so one of the things I remember Gary telling me about, it's like, suppose you were playing, the World Cup and you're the goalie for the soccer. And some of you who have been old ought to know this analogy. Those who are new will get a chance to hear what the old people used to talk about in the old days of security. We'd say, imagine playing soccer and this is the biggest game, but no one's going to tell you what day it's going to be. No one's going to tell you when the game starts. And when the game does start, you get blindfolded, so you can't see who's coming. And oh, by the way, you don't get to hear anyone telling you that they're coming and where they're coming from, what side. You don't get to talk to help anybody. All you get to do is practice these moves, running from one side of the net to the other, trying to jump and block, run out of the net, trying to pretend that you know what's happening and trying to protect that ball from going in the net. That's what cybersecurity was like years ago. So today, what are we trying to do? And why is ATT&CKcon such an interesting and such a energizing way for people to get together? Because we're taking the blindfold off the goalkeeper. We're saying, we can see them coming. We can see there's a bunch of them. We can ask for help, but they can tell us what they hear. We can work as a team together. So all of a sudden, we're changing the defender and the attacker balance. And that's why going from just vulnerabilities to also the attack and threat profiles really has changed the game. And I think the energy and the innovation coming from that kind of a concept of balancing the attacker and defender is really what has propelled the energy on attack and ATT&CKcon. Now, it's interesting, though, that it's really worse than the soccer game, right? Because it's really like all the soccer nets in the world are connected together. And if one person's blindfolded, then that gets in that net and it goes everywhere. In a hyper-connected world, you don't get just defend your net. You got to defend every network that you're connected to. And that's pretty much everything now, because almost every company has got more networks than they can even count. And so such a complex set of networks and a rapidly evolving threat vector, and just the enormity of what's at stake and the energy and persistence of the adversary says that this is not going to be solved by a brilliant Einstein. It's not going to be solved by any one great company or even one great government or country. There's no boundaries when it comes to our adversaries. They don't care who you are or where you are. They'll go in and out everywhere. So we need a community effort in order to balance this fight. And it's going to take not just government, not just industry, not just researchers, not just innovators. It takes all the community to pull together. And it's not an accident that this community is meeting here, because MITRE is a not-for-profit, and it's often serving, traditionally over our 60 years of history, as a convener, as a trusted partner to bring the different parts of the community, all the different talents, the different perspectives. And the question you have to ask yourself, well, this is great. You tell me it's got to be a community, but can communities really pull this off? I mean, this is a big problem. And we know we haven't made great progress in so many of these big problems in the past. But I'll give you just a couple of examples that we've done in the past with community bringing together. Counterterrorism. When that became the #1 concern in the United States, we brought the community together and we created new intel things, such as, so maybe some of you have heard patterns of life. There was a lot of other terms of intel, activities-based intelligence, moving target indicators. It ended up being patterns of life, but that came from a community. That was not any one company or any one government. It was a group of people like you coming together around a problem saying, this is a really hard problem. How do you unwind terrorist networks? We've done the same thing for healthcare, insurance fraud. It was industry, it was government, it was nonprofits, all getting together and saying, hey, this is a problem that doesn't know boundaries. This fraud is going across all boundaries and affecting everybody. In the first year of working on that, hundreds of millions of dollars of fraud were found in the first year of doing that community approach. We do weapons of mass destruction. I would like to tell you more details about that, but just suffice to say, so far, so good. They haven't gotten into the United States, but that is not by accident. That was done by very strong community partnerships. And again, with, most recent one is we had all the tax return, like HR block into it. All those and IRS and all the different community members there got together in the first year, saved $20 billion of tax fraud from individual returns, which is a 40% decrease from last year. So yes, communities can get together from very different perspectives, and in a common enemy, we can all get together and pull weight and actually make a difference. So it's important that you believe that this community can actually do the same thing here in cybersecurity. And today we're in the early stages of attack, which is, our knowledge base and our understanding of what adversarial behaviors look like. And we can look even inside our own cyber community that we have been able to show this success in the past as a community. When we did vulnerabilities many years ago, some of you were probably involved in that. We start off by, these are vulnerabilities, and they were exploding and people were getting confused. Or what does this mean? I'm counting the same thing twice. This community came up with, common vulnerabilities and exposure, CVE, and that became a worldwide standard that really helped reduce the noise and get people to invest in the right things and to buy the right things. And that's really what we want to do here with ATT&CKcon. So what do we need from you today? What we want is that first, build your network. Give your business cards to each other. This is one of the things that is probably the most important but least visible, is that this is going to build a network for you for years. And you'll see each other over the years and trade war stories, learn from each other, find ways to work, have opportunities to work together, and help make attack easier to use, and more effective, so that we know what are the real problems. So the people who are innovating out there in the industry, they know what you really need to do. And the people who are buying the products can say, oh, I understand how this is more valuable than this. Not just qualitatively, but maybe quantitatively, is to figure out measures of cyber improvement. And if we work together as a community, I'm confident that this will be like the others. We will exceed any one organization can do and make a real difference to the security of our country and our individual companies. So thank you very much. Enjoy your time at ATT&CKcon.
Thank you very much, Rich. It's really important. You're going to hear the community word a lot, and it's something we really believe in. It's something that's I think crucial. So over the next 2 days, if you're here in particular, please make that extra effort to introduce yourself to people who maybe you don't know, to be part of that community, to get plugged in, to expand your network. Speaking of bingo, because you'll hear community a lot of times, you might have, if you're here in McLean, seen the bingo card on your sheet. The instructions are down at the bottom, but suffice it to say, as you are listening to presentations, if you make note of particular techniques that have been mentioned by the speaker, circle them, and if you get bingo, come see Adam Pennington for, I think he's giving away cars. Oh, no, maybe not cars. So now I'm pleased to introduce this morning's keynote speaker, John Lambert. John is the General Manager of Trustworthy Computing at Microsoft and manages the network security and science team in the Trustworthy Computing division. He is responsible for monitoring the security of Microsoft's network and the development of novel defenses protecting systems from attack. John founded the Microsoft Security Engineering Science Center team, which works on cutting-edge methods to detect vulnerabilities and exploit activities and neutralize them through advanced technological countermeasures. Previously at Microsoft, John managed the Microsoft Security Response Center's engineering team. Please welcome John Lambert.
Okay, good morning. All right. I'm really excited to be here. It's kind of a special moment for me. I came here about 5 years ago, and I met with Adam, and I met with Blake. How many of you know Blake Strom? Okay, so I met with him. He showed me this small project he was leading called Attack. It was an inventory of techniques and things like that. I thought it was pretty interesting. If I would have told Blake then that 5 years later, there is going to be a conference and over 1,000 people are going to tune in online, over 100 people are going to come to it, dozens of vendors are going to be implementing what this project is doing, he would have said, "You are crazy. There is no way that is going to happen. What are they smoking in Seattle? And is it legal? This is insane." And actually, if you do know Blake, he's a pretty low-key guy, so it probably would have said something more like, "Interesting." Part of the reason that I was at MITRE was I was going around visiting a number of organizations and just seeing what they were doing in network defense. What was working? What did they find? Because what I found is, despite the doom and gloom of all the headlines, a breach every day, there were a set of defenders that were being very successful at defending their networks. And I wanted to understand what these defenders were doing, what they were finding. And as I found in talking to them, a lot of them basically, they took the received wisdom of the InfoSec canon, and they took the stuff that worked and they kept it. The stuff that didn't work, they discarded it, and they invented stuff that they needed to replace things that really were effective. And I would say, while some of them had great tools, some of them had great resources and data, a common thing that they all had was a different mindset when they approached network defense. Some of the differences that I saw in the mindset of both the folks at MITRE and other organizations I went to was, instead of thinking about defending a list of important things in their network, thank you, Nancy, things like domain controllers or certificate authorities or key repositories, defenders typically, especially that time, really thought of their network as a list of important things to defend. And there was no shortage of things that told them how to go after, important lists of important things. The reality is your network is a graph. Adversaries see that graph, natively operate in that graph, and the advanced defenders were using those concepts to both analyze their network for dependencies and then building safeguards and detections across them. Also, there was a difference between IR teams that would manage incidents. That was the thing that was really the heartbeat of their life. An incident today, an incident tomorrow. And the more advanced defenders recognize that they don't have incidents, they have adversaries. And they need those adversaries cause those incidents. That's where they have contact with them. But you can really learn a lot more about what you're facing by studying everything those adversaries are doing, even when they're not on your network. And they build these trusted networks and talk to others in the community to learn about what they're doing. And so these advanced defenders were really managing adversaries. The other thing is a lot of this world was a very secret world. To some degree, that is still there. But this incidents, attacks, threats, nobody really wanted to talk about this stuff, or maybe they only talked about them in classified spaces. God forbid they go to a conference and take their IR people who know about all the secrets of bad things that have happened to an organization, talk to other people, maybe even their competitors. That would be crazy. And yet other defenders realized that they face common threats, they face common adversaries, and they were willing to put their people forward to talk and build networks of trust and learn to communicate each other about very sensitive incidents, because the reality is this security community is one that is built on trust in people. And learning was really what these companies were wanting to do. They were optimizing to learn, not optimizing to keep things secret. They also had things like, instead of, if they did penetration testing or red teaming, they didn't view it like a report card. How do we do? Do we get an A? Do we pass? In that mode of thinking, red teaming or pen testing is kind of like, it's an output. You do some testing, you get some results, it's an output. And these advanced defenders really viewed pen testing and the results that it got as an input into a continuous improvement of attack and defense and finding weaknesses in their own network. And they also had this mindset that they didn't think about stopping attacks. Oh, put two-factor auth in, now we stop that attack. Or put this other technology and now we've stopped that attack. Because that really is a mindset that doesn't think the adversary is going to co-evolve with you. And so these advanced defenders, they had this mindset of, they're not really stopping attacks, they're just increasing attacker requirements in order to progress the next kind of attack, and they were ready for those things. So I went and met with a number of these organizations to get these kind of insights that they were getting and identifying. And I would say at Microsoft, we hold an event called One Hunt. And One Hunt is an opportunity where, of course, we have a number of divisions at Microsoft. They all have red teams. They have blue teams. They have their specialties. They have their networks are each different. We have the Windows, Office 365, the cloud, et cetera. And One Hunt is an opportunity where we bring all of them together, members of every red team, members of every blue team, and we give them a common task, and then we tell them to go after it. And the purpose is really not what the red team is able to accomplish or what the blue team is able to accomplish. It's all about those team members working together and learning. And this one particular year, you can see here, we had red teams from over 7 different red teams at Microsoft. Yes, that is Mark Rusinovich on the red team photo. No, he was not on the red team. That would be cheating. See the blue team down here. And then we assemble these folks, give them an objective, and give them freedom of action. They can do network attack. They can phish employees if they want. They can tailgate into the building if they want and try to get access to accomplish their objectives. Some insights that we would get out of this event. I talked about that graph-based thinking. Well, this was an opportunity for defenders from all over the company to really practice graph-based thinking and try to have that situational awareness of what was the red team doing at any moment in time, how was that activity linked together, and then to go from this, and then later after the event is over, see what the red team had really accomplished at that point, and sort of reveal cards and see what they knew versus what was really going on. Some of our engineering teams, they're embedded in this event. So not just the operational defenders, but the engineering teams, and they watch how do defenders really do things. And one of the insights that they got was when some activity happens, an alert or some suspicious thing, they saw defenders are constantly going, how did this attack come to happen on the machine? What started that net.exe process, for example? How did it come to get activated on that machine? And that sort of process hierarchy now got embedded into things as a result of just that insight that came from engineers sitting down, seeing how network defenders did their work, and so on. And then one of the techniques the red team did is they knew some of their techniques might eventually get discovered and remediated. So one of them was able to successfully tailgate into a building, and they brought a Raspberry Pi based device. And they found, that neglected part of any building, which is the copy room. They went into the copy room and then they plugged it in. And this would give them access, a network beacon that they could do their attack, even if some of their other malware was found out. How long do you think these devices lived in that copy room? Still there. So that would have been my guess. How many people think 30 days or more? Yep. How many think, anybody optimist here? 5 days or? All right, one optimist in the back. Actually, they planted 2 devices, and they were both found and reported by everyday Microsoft employees within 48 hours. I personally was blown away. I agree. I thought they would still be there. And it was just everyday employees that actually had no idea an event was going on, and they just went into the copy room and they said, "What is that? That shouldn't be here." And they had a way to report it. We had alerted the physical security folks at Microsoft, so they would not call the bomb squad and detonate these devices. So they knew what to do and when to respond. But this is sort of some of the principles designed into this event. Like I mentioned, reveal card. So this is a lot of red teams want to keep some of their things secret, their methods from the blue team, because they don't want the blue team putting a trivial detection in to find their activity. And this is a full scope of revealing what did blue team know, what did red team know. Part of the reason, one of the things we found out of it is the people that team together, that sit there and co-work these events, when there's actually a crisis, they work better together in that crisis because they already know what your strengths are, what you can do for me, what data you have access to, what analysis you can do, and that was really important thing. Another sort of principle is any kind of red team, blue team event is going to have a thing where, they got here, you didn't find out. But really the focus of this event is sharing learnings, not about shaming. So there's no scoring, there's no ranking, there's not points accumulation or anything like that, because it's not about creating winners and losers. It's just about creating that learning environment for people to learn, teach, collaborate. We would have folks that would come up before the event, they would give classes on volatility or some other kind of tool or whatnot. And we're always kind of striving to bring new findings and new techniques. So one of the things that occurred to me as we put this event on year over year is we'd have new blue teams and new red teams that would come on board, maybe an acquisition, or those red team or blue team members would have new team members. And InfoSec is very much an experience-driven profession. Like you gotta do it in order to learn how to do it. It's kind of a school of hard knocks type thing. And so how do you go and increase the rate of learning where people can get up to speed faster? Teams that are starting this out that haven't maybe been through big incidents to work through that are those formative things, how do you increase the rate of learning and proficiency for them? And some of that is what I want to talk to you about today. There's this quote here that I found that I really liked, which if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think it's an important thing that it really goes to the heart of why community is very important. I actually think both of these are important in InfoSec. We need researchers that are on the cutting edge, that are developing advanced things, that are learning, researching both for attack and defense. But if we want to improve the overall community's ability to be successful on these problems, we need to really work together in a way that helps teams get better faster than their current rate. So I want to talk to you today about 4 areas that I think can really help improve information security and help accelerate learning in it. So one is promoting community. Another is organizing knowledge. The next I call executable know-how. And the last is repeatable analysis. Let me start with promoting community. So community has always been an essential part of InfoSec. This is a photo of the back of my office door. I talk a lot at various things, especially at Microsoft. And earlier this month, I was in Montreal at Virus Bulletin. The day before that, I was at Sector, which is the largest gathering of IT security professionals in Canada. And part of the reason I do it is I learned by communicating. When you have to like write down what you're doing, why you're doing it, it really forces you to pop out a level and think about, what the heck am I doing? What are we trying to achieve? What are the proof points of progress and whatnot? And so I find that for me, communicating is just a way that I learn better. And conferences are a great way to do it. And this profession is definitely one where it is built on a lot of relationships. I'm curious, for people in the audience, how many of you know somebody in the audience that you knew from a prior role, not from the current role that you're working in? How many know from a prior role? Just raise of hands. I mean, there's something about security that just gets in people's blood, and they stick with it, and they just pursue a career in it and different things. And I think that those durable relationships are really a key part of this, and conferences are definitely a way to do that. Blogs are another way that people contribute. Casey, aka Sub T, every time Casey blogs about something, I guarantee people at Microsoft are writing that down and doing something about it. I'm sure many of you are here doing as well. Another blog, Enigma, a lot of amazing techniques that come out of this blog that we spend time analyzing, understanding, sharing, researching, and so forth. Twitter, as many of you know, I'm very active on Twitter. I find it actually, if you're a lazy person, Twitter is a fantastic way to meet people. Conferences, you have to travel. Like, I came here from Seattle, plane delayed 5 hours due to fog, finally got here. Twitter takes 5 or 10 minutes to go put out something and make a connection with somebody. Nick is at Fire. I don't know if Nick is here in the conference. If you all raise your hand. Okay, Nick. So Nick and I have a little bit of a battle going on. So Nick is always tweeting about his comm scriptlets that he finds on VirusTotal. And we're always racing each other to find the comm scriptlet first and whatnot. But what Nick and I have really going on is not a comm scriptlet battle. It's an emoji battle. And the battle is who can use the greatest number of emojis and still be taken seriously. So you can see one of mine here. I went a little over the top on this one. And then I would say, I think I do have a little bit of edge because I did post a tweet of how you, in Windows 10, can change the name of your computer to an emoji. And I did, and it works. It's unbelievable. So much so that we're on this battle that we got accused of ruining InfoSec. So there's a hashtag ruining InfoSec club. Actually, they kind of called out Patrick Wardle, does a lot of Mac research, and myself. And I was like, hey, don't forget about Nick Carr from FireEye, Mr. Emoji, where I learned my emoji skills from. So anyway, hashtag ruining InfoSec club. And then, of course, you can participate in the community by creating shared tools. Mimikat's one of my favorites. Benjamin Delphi, the author of it, super nice guy. The thing that is amazing about Mimikatz, besides the fact that red teams everywhere love it, is it's one of these tools that takes you 5 minutes to understand what the heck this tool is doing, but it takes you years to actually do something about what the tool means in your network. The notion of lateral movement, the dependencies on how things are connected at the credential layer. You will spend years as a defender working on credential isolation, network segmentation, just-in-time admin, all kinds of things to reduce the scope and impact, the blast radius if a credential is exposed. And it's one of the phenomenal things about Benjamin's tool. And the last area for community I think is important, and we could do better on is mentoring, which is how do you get people to grow faster in this profession? You can mentor at the individual level. You can mentor at the team level, even inside your own organization. At Microsoft, we have this thing called reverse mentoring. It's a tool where it's not the expert teaching the student. It's a reverse, where somebody that knows and experiences something that they want to teach the rest of the company about. You think of it, we use a lot in a diversity context, which is instead of having senior managers talk to people about how diversity and inclusion are important, we have people that live it every single day teach those senior managers what the heck this stuff is all about and what it's like to really live and experience it. And of course, organizations buddying up with other organizations, and then industries that maybe have encountered some of these, come into close contact with cyber and other things, or some of these advanced adversaries, buddy up with other industries. I found that there's always some unique research, and you'll see later in this talk, there's these other adjacent areas like the data science community, machine learning community that have very innovative tools and techniques that are starting to make their way into the world of network defense. And crossing those corridors, I think, is very interesting and very important. Okay, next, organized knowledge. So clearly, attack fits into the world of organized knowledge. If you want to teach people something quickly, you need a way to efficiently digest it, organize it, have a taxonomy, make it easy for people to learn the net new things they have to do. I think 5 years ago, this matrix was a lot more sparse than it is today. But I also think that's a reflection of researchers contributing new ideas, getting these ideas that maybe were only known about in secret IR, spaces, or maybe only in classified environments, and eventually those things became just added to common knowledge. I see Chris over from Fire. I know it worked a lot of IR, saw a lot of techniques that have eventually made it into this space here today. And so I'm really glad to see, and I think it's a great proof point of just how much the community has embraced this project by MITRE, the ATT&CK project, to contribute to this, because I think the contributions are very important. And then, of course, having detailed description about what the attacks mean, very important. At Microsoft, we track threat groups. Everybody in this industry has a way they refer to threat groups. We assign them an element from the periodic table. So, for example, we have Strontium. FireEye calls them APT28. CrowdStrike calls them Fancy Bear. We assign an element once we track and understand these threat groups and whatnot. And what would be interesting, I think, is imagine each one of these threat groups was described in terms of the techniques that they were known to use in the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. And actually, if you go to this attack navigator, I don't know who created this thing here, if they're there, but it's a super useful tool that's on GitHub where it's got the matrix loaded in it. And then you can do things like select your friendly APT group, that threat group that you're worried about. And then it will highlight the various techniques that they come from. I don't know exactly where the mapping came from, but it would be interesting, and I think a level of collaboration that the industry could publish all of the MITRE ATT&CK mappings for their threat groups. Maybe some of the data of that threat group is secret, or their business is selling those indicators or detections. But I think this higher level description of look, this is the set of techniques we've known them do, would be very, very useful to defenders everywhere. And part of the reason for that is what I've seen is a lot of organizations that are looking to assess their defenses or purchase security products. What they don't really want to know, do you do a great job? Do you get 100% A+ on the entire matrix? What they care about is, look, we face very specific adversaries. How well do you do on them? Now imagine people that track threat groups published their mappings of them. Then, Joe Company could take all of those mappings for all the threat groups they worry about, do the intersection of them and say, now how do these products I'm evaluating, endpoint products, network products, what have you, do against that part of the matrix that I have the greatest amount of concern about. I do think it's something that in the industry we could come together, publish these things, have some style, have some way where we can make these things available across all the companies. Working on advancing slides here. Maybe one of these APT groups didn't like what I had to say about. Okay. So executable know-how. So having knowledge is great, but then we need to speed ways to render that so that people are gaining value and action from that without having to just do okay, now I understand this, now I have to swivel chair over and do something with that. This was an alert put out by US CERT on some cyber activity. It had actually a ton of technical content in it. They had scripts that the attacker was running, a lot of useful information in here. And yes, as a defender, you could say, now how do I go from this, what the attacker is doing here to how does my system know how to find that activity? These were examples we came up with where it's like, oh, you could construct a query that looks like this or it looks like that, and every defender or organization or product vendor could come up with how to do that. There is a project called Sigma, which if you hadn't heard of it, I wanted to put it out there as just an example of, if you know about Yara, how many of you know Yara? Imagine a lot of you do, right? YAR is great for scanning files. Snort, great for scanning packets. And Sigma is really aimed at matching against event data. And so it's an open source project. Florian is the lead on it. And it's basically, you have a format that you can describe matching event data. Think a Windows event, a network event, a firewall event, in a sort of a generic language. And then it has ways to translate that to very specific product backends that actual practical defenders need it to work in that way. So you can go on GitHub, find all these things. These are the different categories of where Florian and other contributors have already created alerts and rules, detections. If you click into just Windows, you can see there are rules for Sysmon, the sysinternals tool, PowerShell, other ones that are built into it. Many different rules. This is just one directory. You can see them. And this is an example of a rule in this project. It has ways to, in a generic language, to specify any. This is looking for the sticky keys attack. If any of you know about this accessibility type of attack. And it's a way to say, look, when you see these fields and these other things together, that means you have evidence that this attack is happening to you. And it's just a generic way to do it. And then the nifty thing about this tool, this project is, well, you don't use Sigma itself. What you're using is you're using Splunk or using some other product or ArcSight or whatnot, and you need that detection to show up in a way that that tool can understand. And it has a bunch of back-end translators, again, all open source, to know how to translate that generic language into all these other different backends. And so now you start to see what the power of community would be. Imagine the community came together, wrote those kind of rules, helped advance the language itself, and then these back-end translators would work across all these different vendors. Now, any new team starting out is going to have the power of all these awesome detections that work great across all these different backends that they may be using. And I know many companies, they don't just use one of these tools. They may have Elasticsearch or Kibana on some part of their network. Another team may have Splunk or some other, commercial off-the-shelf product or whatnot. But I like this project both because of the community aspects. It's on GitHub. You can submit a pull request. You can contribute new rules. And yet there's ways to translate it that make sense for a lot of different backends in a vendor-neutral way. This is an example of what a translation may look like. This is, but the notion of going from a high-level description of a generic thing to something you can take, run, get results on is I think, important. And then another project that Florian has is just a signature of YAR rules. Of course, many of you know YAR, and he has a number of different rules that he's contributed into his repository. One of the nice things about his repository is if you contribute a rule into it, it's run against all the submissions on VirusTotal. And so any hits from that rule are automatically annotated in the community tab. And so if you have a rule and you want it, like, wouldn't it be neat if the rule you wrote was run over everything in VirusTotal? And maybe you have a VirusTotal account where you can put those things in, get hits and whatnot, but you also don't mind it being contributed back to the community itself. Well, this is just an example. I created a rule for a particular CVE, and I contributed to his project. And when you do that, this is how the detection shows up in VirusTotal that any VirusTotal customer can see. Actually, you can see this publicly. You don't have to have a paid subscription to VirusTotal. You have this annotation here that says, hey, this particular rule hit. If you wonder, like, why did that detection hit? What was it looking for? You can go back to GitHub, see what the basis of that was. How did I make that rule show up in VT for that? I just submitted a pull request to GitHub. I came up with my YAR rule, tested it, seemed reasonable. I went to the public GitHub like any of us could do. I submitted a pull request. I said, hey, what do you think about this rule? I didn't actually even know Florian, and I have not ever met Florian. I only know Florian through Twitter, like many people these days. But and you notice, if you just look here, not only that, but just contributing in this way, Florian's like, hey, look, you can optimize your YAR rule by doing this or by doing that and improving that. And I've learned a lot of different tricks of the trade just by participating in a community like this. And so as a result, just by participating in the community, these hits now show up, and they show up for everybody. So there's a lot of different experts in the InfoSec community. Imagine those experts had areas that they sort of watched over attacks in that space. Maybe COM scriptlets, and they contributed those rules that seem to find all those new scriptlets every single day to an open source repository. Now every defender benefits from those things. Okay, testing and validation. So a lot of that was about writing rules that detect stuff. There's also, how do you know your rules are firing on the right stuff? There are a number of people that have done research on how to use MITRE ATT&CK in order to assess how your defenses are. Pick the techniques you need to care about and then measure and score yourself. The Atomic Red Team is a project. I think they're talking later today or tomorrow at this conference about how to generate test cases that actually allow you, synthetic, that allow you to test whether your defenses are firing. Because detections are great, but if you don't know how well they actually, what their signal is, what their true positive, false negative, false positive rate is, you don't know how great your detections are. So even contributing to just things that do test case generation, I think is a very interesting way to participate as well. Okay, repeatable analysis. So this is a section where I'll talk about a tool called Jupyter. How many of you have ever heard of a tool called Jupyter out there? Okay, excellent. So Jupyter it's an open source tool. It comes out of the data science, machine learning community. It doesn't come out of the InfoSec community at all. Actually, what I find is a lot of people coming out of college these days know Jupyter. A lot of established InfoSec professionals, engineers working on security at Microsoft may have never heard of Jupyter. And it's sort of one of those things that, if you've never seen it, you don't know what these kind of tools can do in the world of InfoSec. But it's got a vibrant ecosystem advanced by people every single day, even when we're not paying attention or sleeping. There are people advancing this technology to make it better. It's got a yearly conference. There's already 2.6 million Jupyter notebooks that are hosted on GitHub. Every cloud supports this technology. You don't need to run it in a cloud. You can just run it locally. You can run it on-prem, but you can run it on the cloud. And the key thing about this is there's kind of a picture of what the Jupyter notebook looks like. And the way to think of it is, it's like, if I'd explain this to somebody at Microsoft, it would be, imagine you had OneNote and you had an interactive Python interpreter built into it where you could have a cell that you say, go get me some data, and then you can manipulate it and the output of that and refine it and call any API you want. Anything the Python universe can do, you can do. You can visualize right in line with the notebook. And then once you're done with that, you can share that notebook with others. And then when that other person takes that notebook, not only do they see what you did, they can actually just interactively rerun it themselves and tweak it. And so I think this is a really profound teaching tool, which is why a lot of folks in university use this tool. It's one thing to say, hey, I analyzed that malware, or I did this research on these logs, and here's my conclusion. And then how would you share that? You might have to write an email and explain everything you did. Here you can do it all in the notebook, fetch the data, refine the data, slice and dice the data, and then visualize the data. And then when you capture that that's the entire analysis. They can see, why did you get to that conclusion? They can understand your whole chain of reasoning there. And then others, more importantly, can repeat it. They can start with what you did. They don't have to secretly learn your know-how. They can just go there and hit run on each cell and repeat it, and then do derivative work from it. So that's kind of what Jupyter is in a nutshell. These are some different ways that I've seen Jupyter used. This is just an example of take a query, and then you want to visualize it. So this is a set of machines and what net blocks they're talking to, visualized in what's called a chord diagram. The product where I got this data from, it didn't have support for a chord diagram. It's just one of these visualizations that's out there. Products normally have bar charts and pie charts and all those kind of things, and a chord diagram was just one it doesn't support. But of course, because of the diversity of the Python ecosystem, somebody's already written not only this, but lots of other amazing visualizations out there. And through this power of connecting your data to open source, you don't have to wait for some vendor to come up with support for this. You just have a way to get at your data this easily, visualize it, and come up with some insight, interact with it. And then how do you have the person next to you that doesn't know how to do this, repeat this? All they have to do is take that notebook and run it. So this is rendering as a chord. This is another sort of different visualization, a scatter plot, which is these machines, what net blocks are they communicating to? Clearly, this net block is communicated to by many machines. And the whole point of this is, I want to find an outlier. I want to find odd things to chase. What is this one net block that only one of these machines is communicating to? Imagine taking all your domain controllers or all machines of a similar kind and plotting them like this and then saying, why is this one special? Why is this one doing something different? And it's just an example of something that's easy to do by connecting with the power of sort of the Python and open source ecosystem with all the visualizations that are there, and you're not limited by whatever the heck your product may or may not be to do, your tools may not be able to do. This is just another example of fetching some data from alerts, getting hashes from malware detections in those alerts, and then calling the VirusTotal API and see what does VirusTotal know about these things. So you can start to see how you could script these things together for the basis of automation. And then, you know, truth be told, I didn't discover Jupyter by researching on a website. I went and visited Lockheed Martin many years ago, and I met a guy named Eric Hutchins. I don't know how many of you know Eric. Eric is a giant in this field, and he exposed to me to their use of Jupyter. And this is a notebook that Eric has published on GitHub that is how to, you know, he's using volatility here to do some analysis. It's got this markup in here so he can explain what he's doing and then actually do it. And Eric was really, you know, the teacher that exposed me to this stuff many years ago. Like I said, when I talked about those defenders out there with these practices that, you know, being successful defending their networks, you know, this is 5 years ago. Eric is teaching this to me. How many of you are hearing about this for the first time? And so again, this is part of the power of community, which is let's take these tools and technologies, come together, have a way to showcase them, make them out there. This is another one of just kind of, okay, I want to cluster things together. All of these things are possible just through using, you know, building up, standing on the shoulders of giants and so forth. So, and then I mentioned there's this Jupyter conference. At this Jupyter conference, which is not a cybersecurity conference at all, it's mostly data nerds and machine learning people and data scientists and whatnot. So at this conference, Netflix showed up. Netflix has tons of data. I mean, their most important thing is to recommend that next movie for you to watch. And they do an amazing amount of machine learning and all that to do it. They have really embraced Jupyter Notebooks in a major way in two important aspects. One is they found they have all these different roles and personas at their company, not just the data scientists, but business analysts, data analysts, engineers. And the notebook is kind of a tool they can all use, and it sort of makes sense to everybody. Like, you don't have to maybe be the one to create it, but you can be the one to use it. You can be the one to take some work somebody did and then tweak it for a different data set or whatnot. So they found it to be a very versatile tool, a lot of roles. And I think in InfoSec, we have all of these different roles as well. And so I think the fact that it has this versatility that they're finding in Netflix is an interesting thing that could be used in other fields as well. And so notebooks, I've kind of presented it as one tool you can do to do repeatable analysis. You know, you do your analysis in it, you get your conclusion or whatever, and you're done. Now, there's another project they have, which is, let's say you want to do that every day. Or hey, when that alert fires and you did that investigation, you want to do that every time that alert fires. Or you want to run a job every single day. So there's another project they have called Paper Mill, which is about making those notebooks executables, where there's a headless system that takes those notebooks, you save them, and then it will run those notebooks for you in an automation. And what I think this is interesting for a SOC is because if you can have SOC analysts that can master notebooks, learn a little bit of Python, feel comfortable with that, you know, modality of doing their work, now that same way they did their analysis is the way that they can automate their work. And they can tie that to orchestration or tie that to things that remediate things. And now the tool that is their analysis tool is also their automation tool. And suddenly they start to get in charge of their own productivity in a way that's not like before, where they have to swivel chair over to some engineering org or IT operations group and say, hey, I found this bad thing on the network. Can you automate this away so we don't see that alert anymore, please? Please. Now they have the ability to basically automate all this kind of stuff themselves. So interesting things. And like I said, there's a whole community behind this stuff. Those notebooks have spending time in Python. You have to have all your libraries right that maybe have those VirusTotal APIs or whatever that you're using. And you're not a programmer type person. You're not somebody who's going to be able to get all of, you know, install this SDK and get everything going. So they have this other open source project called Binder. And what Binder is all you have to do is if you create a URL to a notebook hosted on GitHub, I send you the URL, you click the button, this service will spin up a virtual machine, load up all the Python dependencies that the author of that notebook has said are required, and then you immediately in your web browser have a notebook that you can run and interact with and start to execute, and you've had to install nothing in order to get there. And so organizations can take this binder stuff and then host it themselves and make it that easy to share notebooks. So all of these different facets sort of come together in this term, what I call the GitHubification of InfoSec, and it's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea behind this is imagine the community came together and described all the threats and threat groups in terms of the attack matrix that they are known to exercise. And of course, today we have the enterprise matrix, but imagine a cloud matrix, an IoT matrix, an ICS matrix, and these threat groups get described in terms of this. You know, you'll never get us security threat intel folks to ever agree on having one name for a threat group. Just ain't gonna happen. I know everybody's asking for it. Ain't gonna happen. Will we have a Rosetta Stone? I don't even think we'll really do that, even though we may privately have that. But what I think what you could see as a common denominator is all of the threat groups described in terms of the attack matrix that they find in common, and then combine that with, of course, a technique database like MITRE ATT&CK, and then how do you translate those techniques and tactics down to detections? You add in a project like Sigma that has a way to translate from a technique, describe it in a vendor-neutral, open-source, generic, community-friendly way, and then now you have a way to translate that down to specific detections that work in all the detection products that network defenders use every single day. And then the analysis that's done that those products help them and those tools help them do are saved in reusable, rerunnable, schedulable notebooks, all of this open source. And I think it's something like this. You know, I'm not necessarily saying each one of these things is the right answer. There are other projects out there. There's other things besides Sigma and so forth. But the point is, I think it's important for the community to come together, come up with vendor-neutral approaches where experts can contribute their ideas, their techniques, have a way that those work and tick and tie together so that you can go from knowledge down to execution, down to data, down to repeatable analysis, so that a new, with hope, an InfoSec practitioner entering the field 2 years or 5 years from now is going to start with a lot more know-how and ability to actually have prowess on this problem that they don't have to spend 5 years learning through IRs in order to be proficient with it. And when knowledge is shared about, think that Russian threat group that I mentioned the CERT bulletin on earlier, imagine all of that knowledge was captured in a way that was just instantly usable, repeatable, and so forth. I kind of hope the InfoSec practitioners of the future will be able to stand on top of all that technology and community that's behind it. So I hope you found this interesting. I wanted to come here and talk about really how do we use community coming together with these areas of common interest and use them to accelerate learning for everybody that is in this field today through promoting community, of which this conference is a super important part of that, through organizing knowledge, through making know-how executable, and through making analysis, that expertise, repeatable in ways that if you're a new person, you can start with the analysis that an expert did and you can play with it and you can learn and you can iterate from it. And then I'll just close with going back to this quote I put earlier, which is, if you want to fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think community is a great way to go together. So with that, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, John. So we have time for maybe one question. So we have a throw mic here. So if you're interested in asking a question, raise your hand and we will throw something at your head. While people are thinking, John, one of the things, we have a question back there. If we could get the mic to this gentleman.
Talked a lot about community. Are you going to share your Jupyter notebooks?
Am I going to share my Jupyter notebooks?
Yeah,
absolutely.
The ones you had on the screen.
Yes, absolutely. I've put a couple on GitHub already, but I will put more, and absolutely.
Do we have any other questions? I think we are at time then. Thank you very much. Again, please thank John Lambert.
Thank you.
So as we get set up here on stage, I just want to note something, a couple of themes that I heard John talk about in addition to these. were this notion of doing things maybe a little out of your comfort zone, sort of inverting roles, mentors learning from mentees. I think those are all important things that we can try to incorporate into our thinking. Now we're getting to what I think is going to be one of my favorite parts of this conference, where I get to sit down with Blake Strom. So, at MITRE, we have this unique vantage point as a not-for-profit research and development organization that really helps us develop innovative solutions like ATT&CK. And you're all here because of ATT&CK. But we often get the question: so where did ATT&CK really come from? What was really behind it? How did you go from whatever you started with to what it looks like today? And so to answer those questions, I'm going to sit down with Blake Strom to talk about how we got here. So Blake is a cybersecurity researcher and engineer and is one of the original creators of the ATT&CK matrix. Today, he leads MITRE's ATT&CK team, and his interests really span the whole security spectrum, from security operations, red teaming, and adversary emulation to threat hunting and automation. Prior to joining MITRE, Blake worked for the U.S. Department of Defense. So while I do not have two ferns, and I am not Zach Galifianakis, I think you will find this interesting. So please, again, welcome Blake Strom. I think everyone here is already familiar with ATT&CK. I don't think we have to belabor that. But this origin story of ATT&CK, taking form originally back in 2013 is fascinated me since I joined MITRE about 1.5 years ago. So I unfortunately can't take any credit for ATT&CK. But we've seen this incredible growth, from what was 64 techniques to 223 as of yesterday, 80 adversary groups, 280 pieces of software. That's a pretty significant change. And I will also note, about this time last year, we had maybe 1,500 Twitter followers. And when I checked last night, it was 13,200. So pretty awesome. So Blake, can you tell us a little about how ATT&CK got started? What was the thought process?
Yeah, so you mentioned it really started in 2013, but the history kind of goes back a little bit further than that. So ATT&CK was really developed as a way to solve a few problems in another research project that MITRE was working on at the time, called FMX. And that project started, the idea got started about 2010, and then the project really started getting going in about 2012. And the whole goal of that project was to figure out better ways of detecting adversaries after they've already gotten access to the network. So they're already moving around, trying to find their objectives, learning about the environment. And what we really wanted to do was sort of get in the head of the adversary, figure out what they're trying to do, and look for the side effects of their actions on the system. So if you think back in the 2012, 2013, a lot of organizations were basing their defensive posture on indicators of compromise or IOCs. So you think of IP addresses, domains, registry values, file hashes, strings of malware, those sorts of things. But those are very fragile over time. So adversaries are very adept at changing, modifying those things so that one intrusion might use one set of IOCs, and then an adversary would go attack another organization and use a completely different set of IOCs, because they were very much aware of how information was getting shared between organizations. And even recently, some of the folks at FireEye and Mandiant have said that they've seen intrusions where adversaries are actually using different IOCs per system. So it's hard to share information. It's hard to even find other infected systems in one network during an incident if you're just basing it on IOCs. So our goal with FMX was to figure out what are additional data sources that we can use, what sort of information can we collect to help look for that adversary's behavior on the system, and not necessarily focus on their tools or their operational infrastructure, because it's really sort of the difference between looking for an intruder's physical fingerprints during maybe a burglary or something. You'll see sort of what they were going after, what they touched, and stuff like that. But what we're trying to do is sort of figure out, what are adversaries going to go after? How are they going to go after it? So we can set up, cameras to look for that behavior as they're doing it in the act.
So that sounds simple in theory, but in practice, how did you actually do that?
So going back to the FMX research projects, we had basically a defense team and an offense team. The defenders were researching new sensors, so different ways to collect data. They were piping that data back into an analytic repository. We were using Splunk at the time, and then generating analytics based on their hypothesis of what they thought adversaries were going to do. And then we had the red team actually inject those behaviors in a production network to figure out, is this actually working? So at the time, when things were getting going, the red team was driving a lot of the scenarios that were being developed. So they had many years of experience breaking into networks, and they had their own sort of way of doing things. And we had some idea of, common commands that adversaries would use at the time. So like ping-n1 for system discovery, looking to make sure that system was live and running, various net use commands for discovering information. We would pepper those commands within the scenarios that were being developed, but it wasn't really a good structured way. It wasn't really all that repeatable. So we really needed as a way to inject threat intel into the process in a more structured way. So if you're looking at threat intel reports at the time, it was very hard to do that. You would look at one report and it was a really good digest on one particular group, but it was hard to sort of look at what the common behavior is. So what is that one group doing that's similar to another group? Different companies would have different ways of describing things, and it was often at various different levels. So one report would say the adversary moves laterally, but wouldn't say exactly how. And that was a problem. And additional reports tend to focus just on malware. So it was sort of the forensic artifacts of something that could have happened. They would look at the capabilities of the malware and not necessarily how the adversary was actually using it during an incident. So that made it very hard. So what we ended up doing was looking across those reports, doing what we can to filter them out and talk about techniques in the abstract, and working from there to figure out what a good structure is.
This sounds like a great application for a spreadsheet. So why is it not just a spreadsheet?
Well, it was in the beginning. Like any respectable security analyst, we started with Excel. So the original team that created Attack was basically 2 threat intel analysts and 2 red teamers. And the threat intel analysts were Jen Miller-Osborne, who is here in the audience with us today, and me. And then our red teamers were Eric Sheasley, who was also here, and Brad Crawford. So the process that we went through was basically put all the red team knowledge TTPs into Excel and start organizing them and backing them up with what we knew that threat actors were actually doing from open source intelligence, from things that we've seen in previous experiences handling intrusions, and some MITRE data to help back up what we're actually categorizing here. And as we're going through this process, we use the Excel spreadsheet tabs. Each tab was basically an individual tactic. So we'd have a tab for lateral movement, a tab for privilege escalation, a tab for persistence. And it was helpful to organize the data in that way because we can have the technique name. We can start organizing information like what version of the operating system it worked on, what did the adversary get as a result of doing it. If it was privilege escalation, what was the effective permissions after that? Ideas for defense, so what data sources to collect, how to look at the data, and those sorts of things. And as we were going through this process, in the fall of 2013, I was asked to present to senior MITRE leadership on the progress of the FMX research with another colleague of mine, Willie Cooper-Sandin. And through the course of arduous multiple iterations on these slides, I came up with the idea that maybe we should pull out all this data that we were collecting for adversary TTPs and just bring it to the top level, describe the technique name, and then overlay what was actually being done in FMX to detect those techniques. So we had a color for particular data sources and showed like a red color for the gaps of what we couldn't detect at the time. And that was sort of a really pivotal moment for us because we were able to distill out very complex technical information, bring it up to a level that made sense for the senior leadership at MITRE so that they could understand what the security posture was, where to invest resources, and it really increased their confidence in the security program as a result. And ever since then, we've been using this sort of idea that we could take adversary TTPs, relate it to defensive information, and that helped people understand really what we were trying to do in FMX, and also the value that thinking about their defenses in terms of attack and adversary behaviors was really a good moment for us.
So you've mentioned a number of times this FMX research project. So it really sounds like FMX and an attack evolved together.
Yes, yes, very much so. And it was sort of a chicken and the egg moment. Even though FMX came first, attack ended up driving it largely as things evolved over time. And internally, we were using attack as it was being developed to create these adversary simulation scenarios based on real threat data, so that we could show, like, no kidding, like this really matters. A lot of the issues that we were running into early in the days of FMX was, okay, so the red team is using these behaviors, but how does this behavior actually relate to threats that I care about? And as we were starting to include the threat intel into it, it was easy to make that connection that APT3 uses these techniques that the red team is actually injecting into the FMX environment, and showing that we're actually making progress to improve detection.
So when I go around and talk about attack, one of the questions that I get, and you probably get as well, is maybe some of you have, is, why did you make this information public? And sometimes, it's treated as almost a controversial thing. What was the thought process behind it? Was it controversial to take all this information and release it?
Yeah, it was. And a lot of our motivation was because there wasn't really a good taxonomy at the time of how to describe adversary behavior. And I mentioned the reporting aspects earlier, but that was a big moment. So if we can consolidate and talk about TTPs in a way that's consistent across multiple reports of various actor groups, that's really powerful. And attack really filled a good gap there. And if you consider a lot of the adversary life cycles that have been developed over time, they talk about a high-level process the adversary goes through to accomplish their objectives, but it's really generalized. It doesn't describe operational actions that the adversary is going through in a way that defenders can think and reason about what they can actually do about it. And as you mentioned, it was sort of controversial. We get asked a lot, like, okay, so you release this out there, it's sort of the adversary's playbook. Doesn't it also help the adversary sort of learn and adapt? And I think there is a little bit of benefit there, but it is very outweighed for the defender to have the information organized in this way, because they can better understand sort of what they're up against by looking at the adversary's playbook. And at the end of the day, we're not releasing anything that isn't already public. We're backing everything with threat intelligence that's already known out there, a lot of technical information about techniques and how they're done. So any good adversary is probably already going to know most of what's in attack. And for particular adversary groups might have really good OPSEC already. So they're already aware of what's out there. And we're just sort of describing it in a different way that helps the defender a lot more.
Okay, so May 2015, attack publicly released. When did it start to really take off?
So I think it was a slow growth over time. And when we released the website, we created a Twitter account. And that was a very helpful way, as John mentioned, Twitter is awesome for InfoSec, for us to keep ingrained in the community, see what's going on, see what people are talking about with attack, and actually engage with them in real time. And that was incredibly helpful. About a year after we released attack, we published a really big update to it that included a lot more content, new ways of describing groups and software so that it was easier to see sort of the overlap of techniques, better ways of describing the data sources that you could use to detect techniques, so people were able to interact with the attack information a lot more. And then also in the summer of 2016, we started seeing presentations on attack, but this time not from MITRE. So at pretty big conferences too, like DerbyCon and BrewCon. that focused on adversary simulation and how to actually apply attack. But of course, this time it's not MITRE saying that attack's a good thing. It's other people in the community actually showing the benefit that they're seeing from using it in their own internal security and how it could improve others over time.
Which is really the theme and purpose of this conference. So you've talked about how attack was starting to get additional adoption. Maybe you could describe the changes that have been made to attack that helped that adoption?
Yep, yeah. And the original attack was based on Windows systems. There's a lot of information out there on incidents against Windows systems, but that's not all there is out there. So we released an update to include Mac and Linux. We've also expanded attack to mobile systems, so Android and iOS. And of course, if you're going to talk about post-compromise adversary behavior, you have to do something before the adversary gets access to the network. So we compiled pre-attack to help in that area as well. And as attack has improved over time, a lot of the contributions that we've been getting have been incredibly helpful too, because oftentimes people will submit a technique and work with us to get it included, and then they'll do blog posts about it, they'll talk about it at conferences, and that helps to increase awareness and adoption of attack as well.
Yeah, which is a really important point, that we do. Attack benefits a lot from the community contributions that we get. It's really, I think, part of the strength of the framework. So we've been sort of looking to the past. So now if we shift gears and look to the future, what's coming next for attack? What should people be looking forward to?
Yep. So
and helping us with?
Yes. Yeah. So first and foremost, we're working on expansions to attack, looking at just basic knowledge curation, trying to keep it up to date with what threats are actually doing. And we're looking to apply a similar modeling methodology to other domains. So we're looking at network devices, we're looking at control systems, we're looking at cloud as useful ways to expand attack into other domains that people are concerned about. We're also looking at how to incorporate destructive attacks through impacts and effects. So much more beyond just exfiltration, but to include incidents like Sony Pictures, WannaCry, and things like that. We're also looking at better ways to include more technical information and variations of techniques through a concept that we're developing called sub-techniques. And this is largely driven by sometimes people look at the attack matrix and think that's all there is, and that's just not the case. People really need to dive down into the individual techniques, understand how they can be used and the variations on how they can be used. So we want to provide more details around that so that people can develop detections against multiple variations of the technique and not just have one detection for a technique and think that they're done and color their cell green.
Okay, so those are, you just described structural changes to the framework itself. What about the larger ecosystem?
Yeah, so MITRE recently embarked on sort of a new thing for us. So we're using attack-based scenarios to do evaluations of vendor products. And largely our goals with this is efficacy-based. So a lot of vendors in the community have started to use attack, adopt it, and map their detections to it. And customers are often asking them, so, okay, so what's your coverage? How can we verify this? And so they're looking for a neutral third party to basically do that assessment and show how well they cover attack. And we're currently sort of in the thick of finalizing our evals for the first cohort. We're looking to have those results published sometime next month. And we're really hopeful that both the community and the vendors themselves find the data that we're collecting valuable, as well as the process to help improve products over time.
All right, so that's near term. What about 5 years from now? Where, if you had a crystal ball, where do you see attack in this community being in 5 years?
Yeah, I think the first one is probably in the threat intel area. And we've seen a lot of organizations out there who are starting to map attack to threat intel. And I think that's great, but I think there's also a lot of room to grow there. So I think if we can get to the point where information on incidents is shared in more real time, so think of attack observables shared in a more structured fashion, a lot more faster than finished intel reports come out, will be very important, because then we can move attack from just sort of that finished intel viewpoint into what's actually going on today. And we can answer questions like, what is the most popular technique that adversaries are using today? And use that information to help inform what people should care about for their defenses. And I think the second aspect of it is sort of a change in attack itself. So MITRE has been running attack for a long time, sort of curating it as we go along. But it's important to include the community in this, especially when we're looking at other technology domains like cloud and ICS. MITRE has a lot of expertise in this area, but we don't have it all. And we certainly don't have the data to help back up to show that adversaries are actually using techniques against these technologies. So we want to be able to include other people who have that expertise and that knowledge and that data to have a say in attack and how it evolves over time.
Thank you. So those of you in McLean, you now have an opportunity to ask questions of attack team lead and teen heartthrob Blake Strom. So if you want to ask a question, we have the throw mic, or you can come up to the mic while people are getting up the courage to finally talk to Blake Strom. I'll start one off, but you will have to ask questions. Did you ever imagine that attack would become such a big deal like it is today?
No, I didn't. I thought we were going to release this thing, and some people were going to think it's cool, and maybe a few people would use it, and sort of we would move on to the next thing after that. I never really imagined that it would get this big and sort of be sort of the spreadsheet that changed an industry.
and you can't actually go to the mall anymore, right?
I can still go to the
Okay. Sunil.
Hey, Blake. Whoa. So in the way you described the future of attack, it actually sounded like the future of CAR. And we've talked many times about how CAR is really, I think, the core of what the benefit is for having attack. John Lambert mentioned it earlier, and that the detection logic, or the thing that he thought was interesting about Sigma, is really what we see in CAR. Should not we be looking at CAR as the core of what this conference is about, and sharing analytic techniques rather than just what to look for?
And for those of you who are not familiar with CAR is the Cyber Analytics Repository. And we have a bunch of things we're going to be talking about and announcing with respect to CAR over the next few months. If you had anything to add?
Yeah, I agree. That's another big area that needs to be addressed. So how to share more effective information on how to counter threats. And I think there's still a lot of hesitation for open sharing in that area, just because there's some risk at telling the world how you're actually detecting threats. So I think in closed communities, these concepts are being developed, and CAR was a great start for us to get a baseline set of analytics out there. But there's still, of course, more work that MITRE can do to help that. But I think projects like Sigma are definitely in that area too.
All right.
So one of the fundamental problems people have had with implementing things like CVSS, for example, has been that there's no contextual relationship between individual artifacts that have been categorized by CVSS. In the context of attack, having individual TTPs associated with individual IOCs independent of context with one another causes difficulties when generating analytics or detection mechanisms due to the high rate of false positives generated by independent context. How would you suggest that we can address that by adding in context between attack TTPs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think part of that is understanding the context around which actions can be performed. And projects like another project that I work on is called Caldera. And so we're trying to use that concept to help automate how the system actually makes decisions and chains sequences of actions together. So I think that's one piece of that. But I would also say that it's important to actually conduct and inject the adversary behavior within the environment in order to test those hypotheses and those theories. And that's really helpful in analytic development and analytic refinement over time that can help sort of lessen those false positives.
Okay, we have another question. We have a couple of minutes left for.
Can you talk a little bit about what exactly is your vision in terms of cloud? Are you visioning another matrix for the cloud? Just where are you guys going?
Yeah, so the cloud aspect is hard because there isn't a whole lot of threat intel out there on how adversaries are actually leveraging those systems. So I think the first sort of piece there is we need to get organizations to share that sort of data more readily, and that way we'll be able to create a model similar to how we've done with enterprise for cloud systems. So I think it's still a little bit too early to have something set in place, but this is something that we're looking at right now, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to put something out shortly.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think, one of the themes you're going to hear is that, MITRE is serving as this convener to bring this community together, but this is about the community, and this is about leveraging your expertise and your knowledge, and really doing that globally. And so our goal is to really just be that focal point, so that if you get a group of organizations together, say, we have this kind of expertise, we have the information to help us with the cloud technology domain or some other domain, that we can come together as a community and develop that. And so that's just a theme. Don't look to us to develop everything. Hopefully people see MITRE's role as this convener to catalyze this community and bring it together. Do we have another? We have another question up here. If you could throw a microphone at this gentleman's head.
Okay. In terms of community collaboration and workflow between MITRE and the community, what would be the right flow of this collaboration? MITRE basically provide these TTPs, and vendors are gonna consume these. And for example, the severity scores of these TTPs differ between different vendors. Who is gonna have the authority to call these severities and normalize this? Because there ought to be some inconsistency between these. Is MITRE is the one that call the severity level of a specific TTP should be such and such, or different vendors call it differently, and MITRE should somehow recalibrate these things? How you resolve this ambiguity like this?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things there. I think depending on the technique, you can take something like credential dumping, for instance. There's specific ways on how that's done. You shouldn't really see it in your environment, and it's really easy to say that this is bad. But largely, a lot of the behavior that is categorized in attack is things that just can normally be done on a system. So it's kind of hard to take that and assign a severity score from at least MITRE's perspective, because I think a lot of it depends on the end user environment, not necessarily the vendor, not necessarily us in categorizing the TTPs, but what is normal within that environment. And so things like machine learning could probably help there, where you can sort of get a baseline of what is normal in order to figure out, what is abnormal, and then work from there. But I don't really see it as something that MITRE can necessarily help with. And it's really up to the vendors to figure out what makes sense for their customers in that area.
All right, gentlemen at the microphone, you probably have the last question.
Sure. So I don't know much about CAR, and that might answer my question, but is there any movement on attack going towards a community creation of rules? And because it's really, really hard to write rules for attack. Like I've tried, a lot of them are generally difficult to get down to something that it has a low false positive rate. So it would be nice if something like Sigma was linked to an attack, or something where one vendor, one person could say, I wrote it this way, and it can be applied or made better this way.
Yeah, so I mean, our focus on attack is strictly the adversary TTPs. I would say there's a lot of other efforts out there that can help sort of address, how to detect certain things. I mean, there's the Threat Hunter playbook out there. There's several other efforts. So I think we could probably do a better job at, like John mentioned, making sure there's the connective tissue there, so that make it easier for those organizations and those efforts to map to attack. But I don't really see it as an attack problem.
And so just one last question I'm going to throw at you. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen done with attack? I mean, that you could talk about in a.
Yeah, so Shane Steger is here in the audience. Several years ago, he created a board game called Maelstrom that was based on attack. And if you consider like Magic the Gathering for InfoSec. And it was actually a really useful tool to help people understand sort of the back and forth between the adversarial process and what defenders can do against it. And he did open source it, so it's available on GitHub. But if you're interested, check it out. It was actually a pretty cool idea that he created and ended up briefing at DEF CON a couple of years ago.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time today. Please join me in thanking Blake Strom. Now I can get to tell people that I sat and interviewed Blake Strom, cheering me up. So we have a few things before we take our 20-minute break here in McLean. We have some fun things for you to do. It's a fun crowd. You're going to get to vote. You're going to get to make a video. You're going to get to eat. And you're going to get to go talk to exhibitors. So those are all 4 fun things. First, the voting. So we have a large attack matrix right outside this door along that wall. And what we're going to do is pose what we think are interesting questions, which you will then get to vote on. And we developed, after months of experimentation, an incredibly high-tech device to be able to allow you to cast your vote. It's called a push pin, I believe is the terminology. And yes, so we're arming you with pins, and you will go and vote with your answer to each question with a pin. So the first question that we're going to be voting on is, what technique do you believe is the least likely to be seen in the wild? So you'll grab a push pin, look at the matrix, put it in whatever technique you think is least likely to be seen in the wild. And then we're going to tabulate the results. And by the end of the conference, we'll have the results to all the poll questions. And we'll even have probably attack navigator layers. The second is video. Here's your opportunity for your 2 minutes of fame. We're obviously, through this and other activities, we're working to spread the word about attack. And John Wonder from the attack team is going to be in the exhibit area on the far wall with a video camera. And if you're interested, go and sit down with John, and he has a couple of questions to ask you about how you use attack, why you use attack, what you love about attack. So go chat with John. And finally, grab some food and visit our exhibitors. We're going to start up promptly again at 10:50, and we will see you then. So please enjoy and go vote. Bring the chairs up.
Yeah.
Welcome. How are you doing? I'm great. How are you? Doing awesome. We'll follow you this way.
So many times where he
I actually have a copy of the game in another building. Put it out because Blake mentioned I didn't know. Yeah, well, it was interesting while developing it. I put it all together and I thought, need to get down to the point where I can, put it out there and then let everybody buy it online this way. Right, yeah, you guys I had kids to be in the middle, and it was $100 every freaking game. Like, because I know at the time, I spent until about 2 hours or something, 2000. And then I worked for MITRE. At that time, I worked for so I heard about it, kind of got my way.
You encourage me, I'll put in a pull request.
But yeah, I developed
They're like older things. I always struggle with it when
you have
someone optics.
I actually built 7 and you've got 6 unique cards. And I developed all of them on the icon. The artwork, GIMP on the icons. Yeah. At the time, I was in a lot of range. I could do some of what I wanted to do. That's why it came about. I'm trying to get the digital. So I've always had the digital version, and actually we have a model. But I don't know if you guys are part sponsors. If you were, I would say I'd say we need the digital version. But if you're not part of sponsor, then I would say digital version. That's what I'd like to get. Oh yeah, we have it.
Although we still have
the monitors that we have are pretty freaking awesome. Build up.
Future
You
state.
can do it in an iPhone app, or you can do it as a regular.
It's working in a lot of areas, but like we're just not.
You would get a technique page. You have to earn it by. So you know how everybody hears like I don't know how I have techniques, detection techniques, but I don't know how to change them to make it so that they're very valid or that default doesn't break. That's a problem. And this is meant to kind of train you on the chain. And I'm actually going to be.
One thing that like our team is starting to find is that
you might be able to figure out that the solution to get the change.
Real like granular games and all of that. It's all about higher style loader. Chase for like every attribute that so like we're trying to get into the combinatorial saying that's on 2 or 3 of these things.
And in that exfiltration,
you get another ML
category. You have compressed data, one of the techniques.
Well, that's what we're
you also have
doing.
Compressed data going
We're
in
writing a
via,
detection for
encrypted known channels, right? That's actually an add
yeah, thanks.
John, I'm looking at a registration platform to add
actually go. This is your book.
And one of the challenges that I'm facing here is how to architect that.
That'll be kind of
About source and the way that is the paradox that we're facing is that TI feeds managed security and then there is a component of normalization between TI management component of it, which is product
the Amazon
Amazon portion that those are in charge of it.
I know, so I know.
And then there is a source for that, like DF Labs, the Visto and others. And then it goes to interact with other orchestration with other things. And then you go to take action, run book, playbook, into incident response component of it. Now, in the first 2 steps of this sequence, the management of it and also the core of the SOAR, there is a kind of dispute between the vendors. One of them say that the other one is irrelevant. I can do the other roles of the And I honestly don't know whether they're bluffing it or whether it's a,
Well, I can tell you, the game is developed in conjunction with
unless you don't go and do it and run the playbooks, you don't know what it is, and it is a big investment. If you wanna, it's not a
videos that are linked.
simple POC type of proposition, and you have to go do that, build your playbooks and see whether it's a scale up or things like that. I'm wondering if you guys in your team are doing things like this, or and if you do, is it the in-house product? What is your
Yeah, so some
practice?
teams, to do the automation part, they have built up basically orchestration frameworks that actuate stuff relevant to Microsoft. This to an Azure,
Even though I know that those two portions of the organization don't all.
I know like for ATP, they talk tonight.
Yeah. Well, I've just heard it.
Orchestration and automation, kind of more auto remediate. So alert fires, do this set of actions automatically. You go get a little bit of forensic package from the machine, do this other various tasks. So it's more embedding that functionality directly into it. The other thing that Microsoft is doing is security APIs. Today is like, so it's basically APIs that get data about security entities, get alerts across the Microsoft product. But they're working on adding actions.
One back here, so you can't
And that
see
would be
them.
sort of
I don't really want to see them.
API
Oh wait,
from
did you put it
Microsoft, so
like?
think
Yeah.
Azure AD
And then
identity,
tilt, it
what
doesn't
you do
tilt any
password
further?
reset.
No, we can stick something under it, I guess.
How do you do that in a consistent API way across the entities, across the Microsoft universe? Putting stuff in
Right, so is
your
that-
products can call that API. SOC operations can call it. So that's kind of the direction.
Does it look brighter with the light?
With TI feed? Do you directly feed the TI feed, or do you need
Okay.
this kind of
Yeah, you
management
need
from
something in there that
It'll be
is-
Richard, he's the
So
only
in
one,
case of
so
like
I'll
Defender
let him
ATP,
know about
it
it.
does this detection. And then it has these playbooks that are part of it that are doing these auto mitigation, auto investigate steps. Like the first 2-3 things every vendor is going to do. So they still need products that are going to do that part of it. But like I said, we're also just providing APIs that any product, Palo Alto or others.
So you're counting on the TI feed that come with those vendors. You don't.
It's more like the detection and response.
Test.
That
Test.
API
All right.
that are
Hello?
detection, that are going to know what the right next action is to do. Like they know about your machine's users, identities, and then they're going to kick off the next action. And that's where the SOC analysts are telling it, run this playbook here, run that playbook here.
When you're ready to go, this one does have a clip. Can you get it in your pocket?
Yeah, it should fit.
She'll be-
And if you wanna add that to enrich your TI,
Yeah.
give me more. How you can do
So
that?
yeah, so those products that support getting custom TI.
Right.
You bring your own TI, and then those will generate alerts or add context to existing alerts.
Not either.
And again, that
For
products still have a
for historic reason.
orchestration part within them. So the TI is just kind of another way to generate alerts or add context.
Then
On
you
top of the
then you
existing.
need this aggregator of TIs, that kind of management level.
Yep, you need some way to get into the product. So you gotta be there.
Okay.
So we know that everybody is going to get TI from any and all sources. So we have ways to get it into the product.
Test. All right.
It's quite, I think, new.
Yeah,
There is a lot of gray area.
I agree. I think it's an area that's sort of ripe for a lot more maturation, which is, we'll see where we can get with our security graph. We can build out actions for stuff in the Microsoft universe, which is a lot of things people do need to action, but we also want vendors to partner and add Palo Alto or Zscaler or other actions that are relevant in their product universe, but to have not, so that defenders don't have to learn 20 APIs.
Actually,
This
that's
stuff work,
that's an interesting part. That
but it's a little chicken and egg of like, nobody's using the API. We're not doing that. So like, how do you get people to add to it?
And we try to integrate our cloud with kind of a hybrid AWS Azure, and we try to use, and we try to avoid.
Can I have somebody stand up there? You want podium? How about here? Oh yeah, we'll have them. It won't be like tomorrow, but we'll have them out for the next week. Yeah, that's good. That's better. Yeah, that's I think that's gonna be better. No problem. My inner Steve is saying that we want lights on this side too. Just like the setup on the side.
I think we're standing next to each other.
Yeah, I'll be standing right to the right of you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you mind if I stay more in? Because I think you can probably see over my head and I
Yeah.
probably can't see over
I'll stay right
yours.
here.
Yeah, that should work.
And then just when we switch over, we'll
Yeah.
switch spots. Or
There's so much extra cord here. Do you just like stuff it into
Oh,
your
I just stuffed it
pocket?
in my pocket, yeah.
I was like, is this for giants or something? That's what I say about everything. Also, so I noticed, I think, so Richard's introducing us off of some of our bios. So our bio slide might be redundant.
Okay, so we'll just
we can just
kinda-
do like fun fact maybe, because they don't include fun facts here.
Okay.
So
I'll
we'll just do our fun
about
facts.
pictures, yes.
Yeah, and then we can just move right into it. All right.
Yeah, so I'm the first guy jumped my It's like, that's exactly what we're doing.
I know. I was like,
it's good and it's bad.
well, because I was like at first, because I
Were these here before? Okay, to blind me. So welcome back here in McLean, and those of you online. I took a look at the attack matrix and the voting, and last time I checked, it was sort of neck and neck between hardware edition and exfiltration over physical medium. And Katie Nichols actually has memorized every attack technique ID. So just come up to Katie and give her the name of a technique, and she will tell you the ID. All right, she maybe not, won't do that. Again, just a reminder, if you have questions about attack and you're looking for a MITRE person who works on the attack team, just look for this helpful red dot. Also, just a reminder that during lunch, we'll also have, and the other breaks, John Wonder is anxiously awaiting to ask you questions and memorialize that in video. So please take advantage of that. So this morning's next part of the presentation, we had tons of great submissions for this conference. It was really hard to choose which presentations to accept in the short time we have. But the ones we are going to hear from now, we're all about organizations that are using attack in innovative ways inside of their own organizations. And this morning we'll hear from USAA, Delta Dental, and General Electric. And first up will be GE, and we have Emma McMullen and Justin Schrenko. Emma is a cyber intelligence analyst at GE and has served as the product owner for GE's internally developed attack tool. She specializes in Chinese APT tracking and assesses how Chinese national strategies align to APT targeting, patterns of intellectual property. Justin is a senior incident responder at General Electric and has worked at GE in various IR roles since 2011. Until recently, he was focused on CERT automation and orchestration, but now drives content development using the attack framework. And a fun fact outside of GE, Justin is a member of the Michigan Cyber Civilian Corps. Please welcome Emma McMullen and Justin Schrenko.
Hey, everybody. So thanks for welcoming us today. We can get right into it. So we're going to be talking to you today about summiting the pyramid of pain, operationalizing attack, and essentially how and why you should be integrating attack into your daily operations. So we started out with some fun facts, but apparently those have been spoiled for you. But a little bit extra. So Justin, you want to say something extra interesting about yourself?
That's actually me up in Mackinac Island. My families are really big campers. So Mackinac Island, middle of the Michigan Straits, kind of a rite of passage for young kids to ride their bike around it. That's actually my son in the very background there, making his achievement.
And a little fun fact about me, I'm working on my third half marathon, and I'm also working on hiking through the desert in Dubai in this picture. But let's start in on the actual presentation. So what do we mean when we're saying summiting the pyramid? So for those of you who don't know, this is the pyramid of pain. And at the bottom, you have what we're talking about, more traditional indicators of compromise, right? So you've got hash values, IP addresses, and as you move up this pyramid, you're able to exact more pain on your adversary by being able to detect at those levels of indicators. So at the top, you have TTPs, right? Tactic, techniques, and procedures. As you move more towards behavioral detection, you're able to exact more pain. but that's something we all know, right? Like we're all trying to move towards behavioral detection. That's why we're all here. So really when we were looking at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, the question came to be more how. How do we integrate that into operations? How are we actually able to improve our detection? So we knew we wanted to integrate attack into our daily operations. And largely this was why. So this annoying workflow you're looking at with the bright red boxes, this is the problem set. This is where we were pre-attack. So I know not a lot of you will have Intel teams or necessarily have a certain workflow with how they work with CERT. But for us on the Intel team, our main mission is to making sure that we're providing the best possible actionable intelligence to other teams like the CERT within GE. So that meant a lot of OSINT collection, actor tracking, and even traditional indicator processing. On the CERT side, they were doing things like detection creation, responding to incidents and alerts. The problem is we were getting kind of stuck in that cycle, which you can see when we're talking about those boxes at the end, daily briefings, some of the malware analysis, is that it kind of just got funneled into a database, and pretty much any time it ever got to the CERT was just through random ad hoc communication. We didn't really have a solid workflow to work together because a lot of times we were just speaking completely different languages to each other. So we knew, okay, we need to fix that. We know we need to move towards behavioral detection. The solution was really just one thing, just adopting the attack framework into those daily operations. So we knew that would allow us to break out of some of these siloed operations, and that an attack operational workflow that begins with intelligence collection and ends with detection deployed from that intelligence processing could drive better detection and help us work together. So what did that mean when we actually started that whole process? So the first thing, and I think we were kind of teed up for this before in some of the previous speakers, is that we knew on the intelligence collection side, we needed to start processing for more than just traditional indicators and more than just, okay, what is this actor doing and who's doing what? It's actually about processing based on behaviors and TTPs. So if you see as much as you can with the terrible loss of pixels in this image, that there's actually a PowerShell script here that we've highlighted. And that when you're looking at the annotation, the way that we did it is we pulled out the T number so that the CERT analyst in the future who's going to be looking at this can always refer back to the MITRE wiki. We have a tactic and technique labeled, but most importantly, we outlined the execution note and we provided context for that PowerShell script, how it was being used. And that really is the rub of it, because whatever we were processing, we knew we wanted to have custom detection built for that at the end of this process. No more just sitting in a database never being used. So that eventually led to a spreadsheet, right? We all start in spreadsheets at some point or another. So each one of these lines is one of those TTPs that I annotated. So as we're going through our OSINT feed, I've annotated my report. I have all the behaviors pulled out. Each behavior is its own line. See the execution notes at the end. Seems simple, right? Should totally have streamlined our workflow. No. You can see here, that actually led to another spreadsheet and another spreadsheet, and eventually actually 4 different spreadsheets just to get through the whole process of doing quality assurance testing, making sure that certain intel were talking through how they were going to actually write detection from this. And unfortunately, so you're seeing on the one hand, we have kind of closed that intelligence gap, right? That's not there anymore. But you're still having ad hoc communication around some of the internal incidents. And this actually was a super time-consuming process. And furthermore, that metadata, there's so much valuable information in the patterns of behaviors in those spreadsheets, but it was just massively impossible to use. Because the more we were doing this, the more we became trapped in the spreadsheet of pain. If you see here, that's actually over 720 TTPs. We got there within 2 months of starting this process. So we were processing a lot. We were really happy about that. There was no way the CERT was going to be able to keep up with writing rules for all of that. And there was also no way anyone could really effectively search through that or even understand what you're looking at. So we knew that this just wasn't tenable the way that we were doing it. It wasn't going to scale. And we're telling you this because we hope that those of you who are still in spreadsheets can avoid this problem in the future. And that's why we went to TMAT. So that's the tool that I serve as a product owner for. And this is our in-house end-to-end attack tool. So you see, it might look a little spreadsheety still in some of those lines, but what's amazing about it is like the search functionality is so much more advanced and complex than just being in a spreadsheet. And the way that we built these different data objects really allows you to effectively pivot and learn a lot more about the relationships between different TTPs, actors, and really drill down into some interesting questions, which I'll get more into at the end. So that led us to our current workflow. So now all those angry red boxes you saw before have been replaced, right? So now if you see at the top, Intel and CERT are actually working together in one streamlined workflow. Intel starts it, then we hand it off to the CERT. We start out with actual integration, you have the report being processed, and it gets pushed through all in TMAT. And what the best part about this is that we are finally able to capture the metadata coming out of this. And that yields to much more interesting concepts of how you can map your own coverage if you're also documenting not just the intelligence you've collected, the TTPs you've processed, but also all the behaviors and rules that you've created that align to those TTPs. So this is what the new process looks like. So this is intelligence ingestion at the very beginning of the process. So we've got the annotated report, right? All the TTPs are still in there, but now you have report name, link, your ticketing system, whatever you want to use, and then you can just generate infinite TTPs. So you never have to worry about having like a really ugly spreadsheet that you're constantly scrolling through. They're all set data objects and they always have the campaign affiliated with each TTP. So you're always able to closely map what actor is using what technique, but still pivot back to the original report or information source that it came from. And then we had to push through to quality assurance. So this is definitely still kind of new stuff, even though it's been around for a couple of years, right? It takes a while to train people up on how to actually process for TTPs, how you're writing detection. So we wanted to make sure that we had some of our more technical team members just do quality assurance for every TTP generated before it got pushed out to the CERT. So that way the CERT's not writing rules on things that didn't make sense, that they couldn't use, that weren't actionable, or were just incorrect. And that's where we got into detection creation. So now the CERT analyst, when they're looking through different TTPs, they can search, they can filter. So I pulled up PowerShell here. If everyone doing bingo, you can mark that now. But you can actually search through, you could even type in a specific command you wanted to create detection for. And then you can annotate, okay, here's my hypothesis for detection, build out gaps, even talk about actionability. So then the Intel analyst in the future knows what they got right, knows what they got wrong, and we're always having that feedback loop to build better intelligence. But for now, I'm going to let Justin talk a little bit more about how we create detection.
So kind of back to the pyramid of pain here. GECERT's been around for a while, and it was essentially built off of network security monitoring principles. So we had this massive sensor grid in place that was looking at all of our ingress and egress type of traffic coming out, which led us to pretty easily capture a lot of the bottom part in some automated fashion that's backed by a pretty good quality assurance method. Along with that, we also had a pretty good handle on network hosts. So you're talking about traditional signature-based snort rules, all that good stuff. But we were kind of lacking on the really the tools and the pinnacle of everything, the TTPs. So what we were kind of faced with is your standard signature. You have a signature fires based on whatever subjective criticality that it was set on. Could be based off of actors, stuff like that. You set your critical high, medium, low, goes to your analyst. Your analyst has to go ahead and figure all that stuff out, what it means, false positive, true positive. But now moving to this new method, utilizing attack, we're allowed to attach a ton of metadata and generate behaviors. Our behaviors, which I'll kind of show an example in a minute here, could be more or less benign in nature. They're just something that happens on a system. Oh, right. Sorry, my mic was off. Could be things that were happening on a system, and what would normally happen every day might not mean anything. But when you start making detections for multiple behaviors, hundreds of behaviors that might have a very low fidelity, and you start using the analytics, some people mention CAR, to kind of bring those together of what's actually happening on an endpoint, then you can start finding some really interesting things. If you start seeing more behaviors fire with a specific technique, you can kind of cluster your techniques together. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 techniques. Those techniques could actually map to a specific kill chain section. So we still use kill chain. We did that by basically mapping a lot of our the MITRE techniques to kill chain behavior. And it just kind of gives us a better way to actually find out what's going on in an environment, and it gives a better picture to the analysts instead of just looking at a signature and figuring out, yes, true, positive, or not. They actually have the information in front of them. So to accomplish this, we also did another method where we kind of mapped our tools to the attack data sources. So you need to have visibility, and to get visibility and to see these behaviors, we need to know what we could see. So we went through kind of a process of saying, okay, the tools are actually kind of blocked out in blue here. So those are our tools. You have your attack data sources, mapped out confidence levels to what we think that tool can see, which will later kind of build a confidence profile, which Emma will talk about. Key importance here of knowing this. So for us in the cert of creating behaviors, the content dev, we sit in TMET also. We essentially start out with the TTPs that they have that they've created for us. In this instance, they put in a report ID, the kill chain phase, the tactic, which is defense evasion, the technique, which is disabling security tools, and the note from the actual report. So in this case, the tool and or the actor interacting with the tool essentially just deleted the Windows event logs. Pretty simple type of behavior to detect. It could happen for a proper reason, might not. So it's not going to be a very high fidelity behavior. It's not going to be something that we're going to automatically alert on every time we see it. But in order to do that, we have to essentially come up with the hypothesis to create the behavior. So the simple hypothesis is looking for a tool or a command running and deleting the event logs on a system. Pretty simple enough, but there's multiple ways to do that. So we want to make our behaviors generic as possible. So you go out and do your research. How can you delete system logs off of Windows environment? Which leads us to the behavior creation. So this is the thing that's actually going to run in our in Splunk that's looking for this specific behavior. It's going to look for the usage of Wintel delete, BC edit, and or WinML WB admin. So 3 programs instead of just the one note that the original note had mentioned. So with that, we actually also developed some type of a content dev CDI CI system some things were mentioned a little bit earlier. We built something in-house, but our behaviors are based off of essentially two different files. We have a config JSON, which is a thing that actually holds all of our metadata, which our analytics are using to kind of bring all these behaviors together to make a true type of alert. And then we have the real file itself, which is essentially the search and or maybe a signature that you put in there. This process goes through really a QA process in itself. So you have Jenkins that does all these sanity checks, make sure that your syntax is correct, goes through a peer review process. And after that peer review process, it finally gets deployed out to our enterprise. So what?
Great. So you guys have seen a lot about that whole process end to end, right? So it begins with the intelligence collection and it ends with the signature being deployed. And it's all, again, based around behavioral detection, the attack framework. So you've seen the how, but why should you care? Well, because there's a lot more to this kind of process than just being able to deploy better detection. The metadata within this tool has actually proved to be amazingly valuable. So I've got a heat map up here. I'm going to start off by saying this is not a real heat map. This is dummy data. It's coming out of our sandbox. So just wanting you to know I'm not showing you where GE does or doesn't have coverage. But the cool thing is if you click into the green boxes, so that green obviously means that we've deployed behaviors to that technique. Now what's great about it is if I click into that green box, it pulls up every behavior. And even from there, I could pivot back to the hypothesis, pivot back to the TTPs, pivot back to the reports. It's that pivotability that always allows your analysts to have just a better understanding of the context and ask more complex questions. So when we get into coverage questions, which I know we all have leaders or maybe customers ask that, this really scary thing happened, are we covered? Well, now I could look into this and say, and while of course whether or not you've deployed a signature is just one aspect of that coverage, I could say, okay, well, let me look at all the techniques that were used in that attack. Do we have green on all of those techniques? Okay, we have 80% of those techniques covered, but there's a couple that we don't. So let's prioritize detection for that.
So that's getting deeper into understanding what your actual threat landscape looks like. But another great part of that coverage question, right, is the visibility. And that's what Justin was talking about with the confidence profiles and looking at your tools. So these are some graphs that we've mocked up that actually are, well, these are actually real. That's why we blurred everything out. So let's say this inner circle here, those are all of our vendors that we use, all of the tools that help us detect on things. So I've got vendor X highlighted. Now, all of those purple circles, those are all of MITRE's data sources, essentially saying, can this tool actually detect on those kinds of data sources? And then the outer circle is the confidence profile. So green being high confidence, yellow being moderate confidence, red being low confidence. So if I'm evaluating vendor X, I'm saying that actually covers a good chunk of that pie, right? Actually better than any of our other vendors. And from all of those data sources that it covers, it's actually in the high to moderate category for pretty much everything. So I'm feeling pretty good about vendor X. So then when my leaders come in and say, you know, we spent a lot of money on vendor X, was it worth it? Maybe I heard this other vendor was better. Or even I'll say, I want to compare it. I want to know, how does vendor X stack up against vendor Y? Is it better? How do they do detection differently? So I can look at this maybe bottom circle here. Let's say that's vendor Y. And I see actually vendor Y covers a much smaller portion of that data source, and also that almost all of it's in red, or at least yellow. It's not exactly a winning recommendation for vendor Y, right? And then that's maybe either feedback you can give to your vendors, you can understand where you might want to prioritize your dollars, but you just get a better understanding of what your coverage looks like. So that's why when the so what is, that there's always value in the metadata. And that's why you really want to move to operationalize attack. So we've talked a lot about behavioral coverage and the capabilities that you can get from those analytics. But also, again, remember, it's just giving you better detection. So when we compared our attack alerts to our non-attack alerts, we found that our attack alerts had 124% higher true positive rate than our non-attack alerts. We were having our analysts spend a lot less time running down false positives and wasting their time. And some of the stuff that we're also starting to work on, enabled by TMAT, is actor tracking. So each actor can have its own specific heat map where we can map out techniques and see if we've deployed behaviors for it. And then prioritization. Are actors using one technique more than others? We can start prioritizing that for cert detection. So just to wrap it up, that the key takeaways here is when you have operationalization, you have better cross-team operations where teams are speaking the same language, working together, but also you're having higher fidelity in your alerting. You're also allowing to the support of intelligence-driven defense. So all of your detection is mapping back to trends that you're actually seeing in the wild. And then finally, the value in the metadata. You're going to be able to answer a lot more complex questions in analytics enabled by, again, that common language of attack. And with that, I'll yield to questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Emma and Justin. I'm just going to sneak in here. We know how the question and answer period works. We've been through this. We survived the last time. So does anyone have any questions? As we're waiting for someone to raise their hand. Oh, we have a question. Can we throw this man a mic? Or he can use that. I'm just going to stand over here.
So when it comes to actually deploying protective tools, there's a lot that's caught up in the capabilities that are actually deployed and how they're deployed. So how do you balance that with what you've presented here for management as a first question? Second question, it's a cat and mouse game. As those capabilities that are listed kind of get degraded and worked around, what do you do to shore those back up?
Sure. So I guess on the first part, a lot of what we're documenting as we're going through this process is not only what we can do with the hypothesis. Can we make a hypothesis for first is tracked. Can't make a hypothesis, that's basically set out as a gap. So that gap is recorded and it kind of flows back into our confidence profile so that we can go to leadership saying that, you know, we really need to see this piece of information to get to the point of being able to detect this particular technique running over our environment. I think that's what you're asking for? Kind of, okay. So yeah, there is that feedback process for that. The second question, I'm sorry.
I can take that one.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think one of the cool things that we've got about this process is, okay, right, adversaries are always changing. The great part about attack is you're still just tracking their behaviors. And the best part is that since we've operationalized it, on the intel side, pretty much anytime we see reporting OSINT feeds or things that we're learning through our shared intel communities, we can document that right away. So if an actor is changing its behaviors, we're documenting that, and that gets pushed through to attack. And then I know Justin's going to be picking up all the TTPs I pulled out and pulling detection for it. So it's that real-time kind of process that it's always working together, like nothing's just sitting around. It's actually always being leveraged, helps us respond actually a lot faster than we were before to map and discover and deploy signatures for some of those changing adversary TTPs. Does that answer your question? Mostly.
All right, other questions? Gentlemen in the back.
So for TMET, is there any thoughts about putting that open source and releasing it, or is it just going to stay an in-house app?
Yeah, I think we're still debating that on our end. It was never meant to be developed originally if we were going to have that be deployed open source or how we wanted to use it. But I mean, if we've kind of identified there might be a gap in the market, so possibly, but that's a question only our legal can answer for us. All right, yeah.
Another question.
Hi, so you've been using this process for a while in your operations. I'm assuming that you're not like finished. So where are your kind of like pain points where you see this going next?
That's a great question. So there's definitely still pain points. A lot of it could probably come down to automation integration. So there's still like a bunch of, when I'm looking at that heat map, right, that's just on behavioral coverage, but I know we've got so many more signatures we've already deployed that would map back to that. So going through a lot of that historical data is going to be a pain. We're hoping we could maybe automate some more of our integration with those signatures so that it's just kind of automatically ingested into the tool. And then future state stuff is kind of what I ended with, right? So that actor tracking component and then technique prioritization. So I don't want Justin to have to maybe like search around constantly or like, maybe I'll do this or maybe I'll do that. You've got the top most dangerous like techniques always prioritized for you right away.
Okay. Other questions while people,
Yeah, I guess 2 questions. I'll start with one and then go to the second one if no one else has questions. So first of all, I was wondering if you could talk more about the confidence levels, because so many people that we talk to are like, how do I determine what my coverage is or how confident I am in detecting something? Could you talk a little bit about how I think you did high, medium, low. How'd you come to that conclusion?
Sure. So admittedly, some of it is actually subjective, but we have an understanding of what our tools are. Kind of the factors that we took into consideration is where we know the tools are deployed, what type of data those tools are looking at. Does that information actually give us anything useful for our purpose, our mission? So we use tools used by other groups too, right? We get those data feeds. So it's kind of looking historically of how they've helped us in the past with investigations, former incidents, and then kind of meshing that up with how confident we are with, basically how well it's deployed and utilized and maintained. So there's a lot of things. It's not a purely quantitative way to figure out your confidence levels, especially on a tool deployment, what it's used for.
Yeah, and I would also say too, when we're doing those vendor comparisons, it's not like this one detects more on these things, so it's better. I would say like we take into consideration that different kinds of tools detect on different kinds of things. So it's not always like a one-to-one comparison,
Right.
but it just helps give you a more holistic view of what your vendors are doing.
Cool, thank you. And number 2, I'm going to ask a threat intel question because that's what I do. I know it's been tough for us as we look through reporting, pulling out techniques. Some things don't go into a lot of detail about post-exploit. What challenges have you found, and any tips for anyone in overcoming some of those challenges?
That's a great question. So I remember when we first started doing this process, I think a lot of people on the Intel team was like, they're crazy, like that we're going to be able to like learn how to do this. But you actually can. The hard part is that not all reporting is created equal, unfortunately. So the first part that we always do when we start training on this process is how to determine actionability. Because I don't want Justin to be flooded with like a bunch of TTPs where it's like kind of you called out before, and they move laterally and like no detail at all. But we know they use this technique. That would pretty much not ever be used in a hypothesis.
Right.
So it's showing, okay, well, was there a screenshot of some of the code that was used? Did they really talk in depth about why they were doing something and like specific processes, how? And just really digging into what it means to have an actionable behavior, because not all things are actionable. Just because you're tagging it with the technique doesn't necessarily mean we can create detection for it. So that's something that's like a constant evolving process, but we've gotten a lot better at it. And I think we're getting much higher fidelity TTPs out of it.
Great, thank you so much.
So we are pretty much out of time. I just was going to sneak in one question of my own, which is you've obviously made a pretty big investment in attack. How in 60 seconds, how did you justify it? Was it difficult to justify, difficult to communicate to your leadership?
So I think we were pretty fortunate in that leadership was pretty on board from the beginning. Like we all knew that moving into the behavioral space was something we had to do. We needed to keep pressing onward about how to evolve our detection capabilities. I think the harder part was then justifying why we needed to build an internal tool for it. That's always going to be something that's hard. But I think we've actually been really lucky that we're starting to see great numbers coming out of it, better detection and better capabilities than we thought we were even going to get. Justin, do you want to add to that?
No, nailed it.
All right, well, please join me in thanking Emma and Justin. I remember the first time or the second time I spoke to Emma, she said something that stuck with me. She said, "We do attack all day, every day." And I thought that was kind of cool for an organization of the size of General Electric. So our next presentation is from Nielsen Cyrus and David Thompson. Nielsen is an information security engineer lead at USAA, where he's had various operational roles since 1997. Currently, as part of the Cyber Threat Operations Center, he provides WebSphere farm support for external and internal web applications and configures USAA's management database. David leads USAA's New Detective Capabilities project and is an active member of the Red Team. He started his security road trip in the Air Force, doing vulnerability assessments for the Air Force Blue Team and working active hunt ops at NSA with 2 deployments to Iraq. Please join me in welcoming Nielsen Cyrus and David Thompson.
So good morning, everyone. We're from USA. It's a financial services institution located in San Antonio, Texas, where we love our breakfast tacos. That's part of the title. So in this presentation, we're going to walk through the path that we took to get MITRE's attack framework integrated into our process and then into the tools that we build around it. Let's see. So my name is Nielsen Cyrus. I've been with USA for over 20 years. Most of that was in IT operations until I was lucky enough to get a job in the Cyber Threat Operations Center, or we call the CTOC. So I have dual hats in the CTOC, 2 roles. The first is provide the CERT analyst with anything that they need, whether that's automation, scripting, detection development. The second role, my first love, is the infrastructure. Get the events, the interesting events, out of our systems and in front of an analyst so that they can do the analysis and work that case. And again, usually behind the scenes, throw me some energy drinks and I'm happy.
All right. Good morning, everybody. So started my cyber career with the Air Force. All right. with the NSA right down the road. After leaving that active duty, went and worked as a pen tester and threat emulation for Johns Hopkins, as well as again for the Air Force. Been with USAA now for 3 years, and as of last Monday, I actually became the manager of the IR team. So one key tip for you guys is keep pushing attack because it gets you promoted. All right? Hashtag results may vary. So before we get into attack, there's someone I want to highlight here who's not upstage. Chris Ferrante over there. So USA has this really cool partnership with the DoD. Right, the majority of our members are either DoD or family members. So we have this partnership called EWI, Education with Industry. And so we take officers and enlisted and send them to USAA for a year to give them that corporate knowledge and kind of get them out of the monotony of the DoD world. So Chris was a Navy intel lieutenant, working with the SEALs and doing all sorts of like cool operational intel. Well, the Navy said, hey, your next assignment is cyber, right after you get done with USAA. So our boss took Chris and said, hey, there's this cool thing out there called attack. You want to try and honcho this and bring this into USAA? And really, we're as far as we are right now with attack because of Chris. So thank you very much, Chris. All right, that's all we got. So before we get in, before we get into agenda, how many managers are in here? I can say I am. All right. And then tech guys, or techies, sorry. All right, cool. Anybody here, active duty vets, retirees? Awesome. So from Nelly, myself, from USAA, thank you very much for your service. Definitely. All right, agenda. Here we go. So we're going to first talk about pre-attack, right? How did USAA get involved into attack? How did we get to even really understanding what attack is? Then we'll talk a little bit about how we integrated attack into our day-to-day ops. You're going to see a lot of similarities with what we're doing and what GE is doing. Not saying they stole our slides, but so there's going to be some foot stompers that you're going to see a lot of similarities. Then Nelly's going to take over on the way ahead and really talk about what it is that he's been building from a automation and just detection and just a really awesome, bringing everything together perspective. And then we'll take questions. So why did we choose attack? So like most of you, we were using Kill Chain at the time. Kill Chain was really good for post-incident, but it really wasn't, like as things are going on, it really wasn't giving us that operational perspective. It also gave us a really good from a 50,000 feet view, but we needed to be in the weeds. Attack, on the other hand, was really giving us those TTPs of, from the pyramid of pain. And everybody knows, those first few layers are the easy wins. It's the TTPs that are tough. One big thing too is it allowed us to move past just traditional IOCs from a threat actor group by really understanding what each block was and why it was important to the overall picture. It allowed us to disposition cases better. It allowed us to build better automation. It allowed us to build better detections. From a red team perspective, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, the threat actor group data was awesome because we were spending a few days reading reports, reading whatever intel we had on Fin7 and everything else, and trying to emulate, trying to do either a portion of that op or a portion of what they were doing or from a cradle to grave type op. So that really helped us out. And then meaningful, right? At the time, we had no idea if attack was going to be meaningful to us or not. Again, this is all Chris. Once we got through with the self-assessments and really seeing where our gaps were and the areas for opportunity, we definitely at that point knew that attack was going to be worth it. And it was worth looking at, or worth investing time, worth investing money and people and other resources. So gap analysis, why we chose it. Again, right? At that time, we only knew what we knew. Sorry, squirrel. So we only knew what we knew. And until we did that self-assessment, we really didn't know all the different TTPs and all the different commands and other ways to hit those tactics and techniques that we didn't have things built out prior. At the time, our detection pipeline, or our detection, the way we built out detection was very reactionary. What was hot on Twitter? What was on this latest intel report? What did we see at a certain con or wherever? Right? We just pushed forward to the fire, and that's how we were building things. What this really allowed us to do was all right, where's everything mapped? Where's our gaps? And how do we allocate that time, money, and resources in a better and more efficient way? So from information sharing, I can talk to, is Heather still there? All right, so I could talk to Heather from BOA, and we can give the same exact, like if I say PowerShell, or if I say, see, now I'm on the point. So input capture, if I say input capture, she knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's the same thing, because we're not only are we part of the FSISAC, but we're also part of HISAC, which used to be NHISAC. They're a little bit further along in their attack presence, I guess. So we've really been working a lot with them. And especially on the information sharing side, we've been giving them IOCs and different tips and everything, just as we're receiving from them. Tracking adversarial techniques. As mentioned before, MITRE did an incredible job with this. We saw the demo earlier with Navigator and, checking, the different APT groups, and you can see all the different boxes that are highlighted. That really allowed us to build into our aggregation / meta case concept, allowed us to build into the different types of automation for our analysts. And then lastly, new tech and research. The first question, if you're coming on site and trying to pitch us some technology, where are you at in attack? What are you bringing to the fight that we don't already have? Compared to what we already have, what's that delta? What are you going to give me? If I have 5 blocks colored green from vendor Y, why am I going to bring you if you're only going to color 3 and then possibly have 1 or 2 others in red, very similar to GE? And then with regards to tech, it also allows us to justify that cost. If we have that one really hard technique that we cannot, or tactic that we cannot, seem to overcome, then maybe it's worth $1 million, or maybe it's worth, giving Nelly, a couple extra weekends to build out this new capability that we didn't have before. So self-assessment. All right, what do you guys think we use to do our self-assessment? Spreadsheets, yes! Oh my goodness. I feel like you guys are prepared. So our spreadsheet, right? We had a little bit more basic spreadsheet at the time, but Chris really revamped it and turned it into this. This took hours and hours and hours and hours of time for us to get this right. We would not even start a meeting unless we had the IR team, the hunt team, detections, the red team, our ML and data science team, and the automation team all together, making sure that we really understood what was going into these blocks. All right, so one thing I want to foot stomp, right? And you can kind of see it here. Expect a lot of red. And honestly, red is not a bad thing, right? It's better to know what you didn't know than just continue to be, I guess, naive about it, right? Plus, it gives you a starting point. From that point forward, you should only get better. And again, that with metrics, it's another good win. So detection tagging. I absolutely hated tags before we started. There's a guy on our team, Mark. Mark, here's your plug. So if you're watching, there you go. He was pushing tags left and right. And when we developed this new detection pipeline, we needed a way for us to integrate attack, integrate the status of the detections, and really kind of understand from a higher level where everything was at. And the tagging really was that for us. Plus, with all of this data, we were then able to feed that into our own Navigator type tool. And so here's that tool, right? So we can check a box that shows, show me all of our detections that are in prod, show us everything that's in test, show us all the different hunts that we have that are either on a standalone hunt or a repeatable hunt that is using automation. You know, and then on top of all of that, we have our own intel team feeding adversary capabilities and techniques that they've been discovering. Again, this is another one of those cool visualization tools for managers and the C-suite. So hopefully down the road we can open source this, but again, we have to fight with legal. All right. And then lastly, so case enrichment with attack. So one of the big things that we do on top of, you know, Git and our navigator type tool, as soon as a case pops for one of our analysts to work, there's playbooks running that will take that specific case, tie it to attack, tie it to anything else that popped on that box with that user. All sorts of different correlation and automation that's done on the background. But this is specific. This dashboard really is what we are showing our C-suite, our IT leadership, our security leadership, you know, and showing them why attack really is so important to us. And you know, if we went further down, we would be able to show you the, you know, true positives versus, you know, false positives and all that kind of fun stuff. But you know, we kind of got attacked by our lawyers and said no. So that's my piece, the management piece, and I'm going to hand it over to Nelly, who is by far way more technical than I am. So you're going to enjoy this.
Especially now that you're in management.
Yes.
All right, so the way ahead. So the flowchart icons across the bottom are probably a technology stack that almost everybody here has. Your event management, your case management, your alerting. Some of the interesting ones are like version control and CI/CD, just like GE had mentioned. My children are the blue ovals in the middle. These are the custom applications that we have written to all communicate and share information and also generate the interesting metrics that management wants. So to me, this should have been in the center of that spoke diagram. This is our detection management reporting. So moving out of GitLab with those tags into a standalone system. One thing David didn't mention about GitLab is the complicated scoring algorithm that we paste into every one of those GitLab issues for a new detection. And it's input from either 5 or 6 different areas. Things like, how common is this in the wild? Are there known POCs for this? From an intel perspective, is this related to threat actors against financial services? So what we wanted to do was pull those different inputs, and it's kind of tough to out of an Excel spreadsheet. It turned out to be tough out of GitLab as well. But we want to end up with that prioritized queue of what detection should we be building out first. So the prioritization of the new detection queue. As with moving to DMR, we also had scripts and rules and jobs laying all over the place, some version controlled, some not. We're going to flip that on its head and make each one of our detections self-contained, version controlled components. I mean, we have some that are just a simple rule querying our event management system. We even have some that are machine learning jobs. So we want to get those bundled up. So if we need to redeploy a new set of detection boxes, we can go through and do it and not worry about losing the underlying pieces that build up the intent of the development or the detection. We also wanted to track the complete pipeline or life cycle of these detections. At a conference like this, I mean, David and I will probably hear 2 or 3 ideas for new detections. We'll send those home through Slack, we'll capture them, put them in the tool, and then we'll go through as a group, get those different inputs, and we'll see where it lands in the queue for development. And then this is also the primary data source for all the other tools that I'm going to cover next. So the first team that provides their input is the Intel team. And the tool for that is Defense Security Posture. Here they work down they work from the actors and the intel side down to the technique. Then on our side from detections, we link detections to those techniques, and then we inherit all of that work that they've put into it. So by changing here, vulnerability to USA of a certain technique might go from a 3 to a 7 because we rolled out a new system. Or we have some new third-party vendor supplying something for us. So they increase that risk. Well, in the old days, that would stay down there as a low priority detection to develop. Based on that feedback, it now slowly moves up in the queue. Another one of those inputs is our hunt team, and David touched on this some. They're a good idea for new detections. So as they go through, they see something, they don't have a detection idea in place for it yet. They go do a hunt, realize we do need a detection for this, they can transfer that over. Where this has really come in helpful, though, is we might be able to lower the priority if they come up with a good hunt, go out, sweep the environment, and say, there's no sign of it right now, so we can hold off and get this higher priority detection done first. And then recurring hunts. For those that we might not have infrastructure or the capability yet to see this behavior, they could go through and set up a recurring hunt to kind of cover our butts until we can get that detection developed, tested, and into production and tuned. So this has the least relevance to MITRE's attack framework, but this is my baby out of all of them, so I had to include it for completeness. Going to MITRE's attack framework, going to this tool set here, we expect and we hope that the time to market for those detections that are sitting in the queue will get faster. The nice thing about this is an analyst, eyes on glass, they can go through and suppress cases. So if we rush a detection to production and one of David's guys is getting overwhelmed in the queue, he's got knobs and dials now that he can go through and tune. This also provides feedback to the underlying detection developer because we keep track of when the suppression was last used and how many times the suppression is fired. So they can go roll that into the underlying endpoint signature or whatever type of signature it is. So a simulation tool, internally, this is our Canary framework. Think the work that Red Canary has done with the Atomic Red Team stuff. That's what this does. It tests our plumbing from end to end today. We want to make sure that for every detection that we have, it's a requirement, but it's not followed 100%. For every detection, there is a script, a POC chunk of code, or even just a command to run on a Windows or Unix machine that will test a certain technique or certain underlying behavior, and that should end up in the case management system. The analyst would normally put eyes on glass, but we can look at it from end to end to make sure our plumbing is solid. A coworker found an interesting thing here. He can actually look for neutered detections. In the previous slide with suppressions, if an analyst got carried away and the number of those cases dropped, he's able to highlight that. Another thing is, might be normal behavior, could be just too much suppression. Either way, the detection owner should go back, take a look, and make sure that the true intent of that detection is still valid. Now for Intel Search Tool. Originally, this did not have any relevance to the attack framework, but it does now. So David mentioned asking your vendors about what they do is related to attack. They use a third-party Intel provider that previously had not considered attack. They are now in the process of doing that. What this tool does is, as our Intel team goes into that third-party provider and starts adding indicators of compromise that are of interest to USA or actor groups of interest to USA, they're brought down and we do 30-day retroactive searches against our top 10 to 12 indexes. An additional step that we do is take exact copies of those events and move those to a separate index. Longer retention, so we have those for more historicals. So one thing interesting to see here is as more and more of the indicators of compromise get tagged with techniques and the attack framework, we'll be able to go through and start building more metrics to show it from a actor and tactic and technique perspective. So this is just management stuff. I'll skip over it since time is almost up. But all of those tools generate a lot of good metrics. In the past, every one of our tools, we had to build in our own dashboards and reporting. Last week, we talked to our enterprise reporting team, and we should be able to get out of that practice. Let us go write the detections and let another team just slurp in all those metrics and build the reports that management needs. So the future. Python for the win. What I want to touch on, though, is the InfoSec community is probably the most innovative bunch of people I have ever met. It's their ideas. It's the open source projects. It's the Sigma project. It's the Atomic Red Team stuff. Everything that we've done has been built on the ideas and projects that y'all have created. And we have a lot of stuff internally. We hope to give back. USA is slow to move. They've been averse to open source, but they are changing, especially this year and going into next year. In the meantime, though, it's the opportunity to present at conferences like this. That's how we can share back, and that's all I have. So with that, it's an honor to be here, and any time for questions.
Yeah, we have a few minutes for questions, so we'll do the throw mic. While people are getting up the cards to ask, oh, we have someone? No. While people are getting up the cards to ask a question, what do you think was there an inflection point in your environment where you went from sort of attack curious to like fully bought in on attack?
I think
so. What was that like?
I think it goes back to the hard work that Chris Ferrante put in. Without his bulldog determination to wrangle us all together and get us to sit in a room and focus on a technique at a time, dive into each one of it and say, what does USAA as an organization think of this? I know we would have skipped most of those meetings. I know it probably would still be a spreadsheet sitting out there getting stale. So I think it's just the determination and the leadership that he brought to getting us to embrace it and then helping us mature it to where it is today.
We have a question in the back.
Hey, Jake Leifer from Mandiant here. I think it's especially important, as you were talking about with the simulation component. You know, we build out these rules, and how do we make sure that everything continues to work and process? Parsers break, versions change, that sort of thing. Can you explain a little bit more what that back-end platform looks like, how you support that? You know, how you're running these scripts and how others might be able to do so?
So I think I sped through it, but one of the requirements we have in a nice flow chart for detection development is you check into version control a canary, whether that's a script or an executable or just a simple command. You check those in and those get pushed out with detection. They get pushed out automatically to a fleet of boxes that we have, our canary boxes, and then they run on various schedules. Some future things that we're looking at is regrouping those into more scenario-based or follow a technique or a tactic or even follow a threat actor. And that's more to keep our CERT analysts busy. Pop one when they're not least expecting it, and it comes from the canary systems. One thing that we want to do, though, and I've looked at, is there's a handful of projects, Atomic Red Team being the biggest one, having some type of conversion mechanism where we can automatically build those canaries based on a lot of the hard work that people have already done. I'm not sure if that completely answers it.
Yeah,
but
thank you.
All right, we probably have time for one more question.
Hi, Tony Gidwani from Threat Connect. So one of the things that's been really interesting in this presentation and the previous one is how you guys have built an entire system, you know, around attack. How long has it taken for you guys to get this up and running? And where was the point where you felt like you were finally starting to hit critical mass and that this was going to stick in your organization?
So David mentioned the iwi project, and we had looked at the navigator off of GitHub. The problem is it didn't speak the same language as our tool sets. And so one of the iwis, Josh Collins, Air Force Tech Sergeant.
Yep.
So he took the concept from Navigator and then he built it very similar, but then connecting into our various tools, into GitLab, into our case management, to pull in those so we could see the nice, pretty red, yellow, and green. Where do we have gaps? Where do we don't? And I think once he built that custom version, that's where it started the ideas of, well, let's get out of GitLab and let's get a first-rate system where we do better scoring, where we have that queue we can always go to, and we can generate those metrics to know where we always stand. All in all, I think within about a 6-month window, a couple of POCs, hey, what do you think of this, David? Would this work for detection development? Talk to the Intel team and say, would you guys want to get out of the spreadsheet and start capturing your inputs this way? Hunt is always the last one to go. They're too busy hunting. So they're the ones we're working with now.
Awesome, thanks.
You're welcome.
All right, and please join me in thanking Nelson and David.
Thank you.
So as we go through ATT&CKcon, I think you're going to hear not only myself, but lots of folks talking about the importance of fostering community collaboration. So this is my shameless plug for you folks to, during lunch and the other breaks, to go tell your story to John Wonder, who will be in the exhibit area. We're not actually letting him eat lunch. He's going to be doing video interviews. So please, tell us your stories and help us spread the word. Because I think that's the powerful part of this event. It's not MITRE people talking about MITRE projects. It's this community talking about something that we've all built together. So our final presentation before lunch is from Matt Styak, Director of Cyber Risk Management at Delta Dental of California, and Jason Sinchak, who's a principal at the Level 9 Group. Matt's work in cyber spans 2 decades with security-conscious organizations, including Fortune 100 insurance and financial services firms. And Jason helps Fortune 500 organizations understand the evolving cyber threat landscape and equips them with appropriate defenses. He has executed hundreds of deep dive penetration tests specializing in enterprise networks, web applications, mobile applications, and hardware devices. Please welcome Matt Styak and Jason Sinchak.
With the clicker, Jason? There we go. All right, I guess you're on clicker duty. All right, well, first of all, a heartfelt thank you to MITRE. It's really an honor to be able to come here and present at the first ATT&CKcon on what we believe to be a fantastic framework. And for the hundreds in attendance and the thousands watching around the world, thank you for coming in to hear us talk. I want to give a quick shout out here to my team, Alan, Billy, Quee, Brian, Irina, and Pat. You guys are the ones who are really doing it and really making this happen day in and day out. And none of this would have been possible without you. So thank you.
And I'm Jason Sinchak. As was mentioned, my career kind of started off in network penetration testing, evolved into hardware and things like that. Did quite a bit of breach investigation around there. And the two of them kind of come together to really shine on why I like the MITRE ATT&CK framework and why I think it's useful. And honestly, I think it's worth just mentioning that someone was brave enough to go out there and put a stake in the ground and say, this is what we're going to focus on now. Because I've been in places where we tried to develop our own frameworks and focus, and it's obviously a hotly contested area of, this should be there, that shouldn't be there. So to have something out there to kind of get the ball moving is more than helpful.
And I think we covered introductions already. So
yeah, so we're going to kind of kick this off with, we are what we believe are the security everyman. And what we mean by that is, obviously, we're going to be talking about agile, continuous improvement, a lot of buzzwords. But before we get into that, kind of reflect a little bit on where we are at the current state. I think there's a lot of people here that are probably familiar with working in blue team environments that may be missing things, whether it's logs, resources, structure may not be there. There's always a thrust to say, once we get this or that, we're going to be where we need to be. And I've seen that in many organizations, different industries, and it seems like it's more the norm than the exception. And so what we've kind of come to accept is that that's just the way it's going to be. And what we need to try and do is develop a way of functioning in that environment where you may always be behind, you may not have the things that you want, but leveraging something like ATT&CK can be very helpful in helping you prioritize what you're doing.
So what's the big idea Well, it really came to us. We read the blogs, we read the tweets, and I think there's a lot of evidence out there in the industry that people are successfully adopting the framework and are using it in their organizations. And the theory behind it is sound. And so we believe, as your average run-of-the-mill security organization, that we could do this. We could be like the big guys, and we could leverage attack.
And so this is kind of what we wanted. We were kind of under the impression that if we run the scripts, we run the tools, we get the data, we execute the techniques, we're going to get our graph that looks good. And you kind of notice when you start down that path of collecting all this data, the reality tends to sink in, especially if you're in an environment that may not have all the resources that you need, that, what are we going to do with this? And the fundamental question that tends to come up is, how are we going to deal with the results? Because effectively, when you're collecting that much data, you're building up a large database about all the things that may be wrong with your organization. So unless you have a system in place to manage that workflow, track what you've tested, what you haven't tested, and see that through to actually fixing it or rationalizing why you're not fixing it, you can end up in a tough situation of essentially admitting that you know about all these bad things, but you're not doing anything about it.
So, once we got our head out of the clouds and set to work on this, I think we realized pretty quickly, maybe it's not that easy. So the first mistake that I think that we made when we set about to adopt attack is that we spent a significant amount of time upfront developing our process, arguing through our workflow, arguing about how we were going to measure, what we were going to measure, arguing about what data we needed. We built out JIRA prototypes so that we could track our work. We built a scoring database. We wrote a bunch of documentation. And we did all of this before we invited the team to start working within this framework. I mean, why wouldn't they just want to use all this stuff? It's brilliant, isn't it? We came to realize pretty quickly that adopting attack is really a cultural change. And it's a change in the way that we expect people on our teams to think about the security problem. And it's a change in the way that we expect them to behave. I like that we've seen several examples where people talk about the kill chain, or people talk about CVE. And so, I think it's right to acknowledge those as analogs to the type of change that we're expecting people to make as we adopt attack into our organizations.
Yeah, so to kind of summarize some of the three key issues that we've seen, been down this road a few times, and on the journey that we were on specifically, the framework itself, is, if you've been in the business for a long time, it's not earth-shattering, right? If you've been pen testing for a long time, or if you've been in breach investigation, incident response, you've probably seen a lot of these. It's obviously refreshing to see them all in one spot and kind of feel a little validated that you know what you're looking at. But it is disruptive in other ways. And from a cultural perspective, it disrupts how, in many cases, a blue team may have worked in the past. So you have SOC resources or someone that creates rules, and they've kind of operated off of more or less intuition, and that's out of design. It's not too dissimilar from something that you would see in the pen test space, where there might not be a lot of process around what that person is doing, but they're a smart guy. They go and implement a rule based on something that they've seen in the past. And as a result, maybe they catch some things and they were right. So that is a cultural issue that you tend to have to deal with, because when you bring attack into the question and they have to now move away from intuition of kind of acting in an ad hoc manner and work within the confines of the framework to say, we're going to focus on these issues, you run into some of those problems. And if you can kind of persevere through that and get through those issues, you'll gain some transparency into what's actually going on with your team, what they're actually looking at once they're focused on things like this. And you get a lot of portability around knowledge. Historically, when everything is moving based on intuition and gut feel, if someone leaves the organization or someone new comes, you lose some of that institutional knowledge that may have been used to construct some of the monitoring strategy previously. So if you get everyone looking at the same Matrix, the same strategy, same focus, you get a lot more portable information.
So now the second thing that we learned is don't underestimate the amount of time that you have to spend framing your outcome and helping people understand where you're going. The example that came up for me personally is we were looking at the technique data compression, my bingo people, and the question naturally came up, why are we looking at this? This has a high degree of false positive. Everybody's using data compression as a technique. Why don't we just go back to the way that we were doing things before and think about what the attackers are doing, and we're going to measure and build against that? And so this highlighted the example that we really needed to focus on reiterating the message that our goal is to determine whether or not we can detect this specific technique. You use that later on, sure, in a constructive manner, maybe if we're looking at the overall attack chain, or we will use it in other manners. But really the goal for today is to figure out how we can measure that particular technique, how we can detect that technique. There's a saying that says that by the time you are tired of repeating something, people have just started listening to you. So this educational challenge, we of course in a stroke of genius decided to compound it by not only introducing attack, but also asking our team to adopt Agile at the same time. And so Agile comes with its own suite of jargon, processes, and educational challenges. And so if you decide to follow in any of our footsteps, you have to account for that as well as you make the transition.
One of the final barriers that we experience is really around resources. And in my experience, especially in the security community or in the technical space, there's a lot of really great solutions to things that work really well in small groups or, kind of when they're designed, but when you implement them and operationalize them, the wheels can kind of fall off. You've seen this with authentication, obviously you can crank down on authentication by applying two-factor, more authentication. And what happens is people can't do work. They'll just stop using it. They'll find some other way around it. And when you see that happen, it tends to inform you of how maybe you can carry yourself the next time around. And one thing that we kind of see rapid when you bring a framework like this in and you're asking people to kind of reinvent their jobs while continuing operations, you're asking them to basically build while they're running, right? So we're running a marathon and we're trying to keep up with operations. We're trying to monitor events. We're trying to do incident response. And now we have to build out this framework and start to shift our focus towards this when you already don't have very many cycles and operations are limited and everyone's, putting in 40, 50-hour weeks.
And all of that, these barriers to adoption just sound exhausting. Who am I kidding? It's exhilarating. It's awesome to be part of this kind of change, right? And there's a quote by Dr. Bobby Hoffman. He wrote a book, Hack Your Motivation. And he says that motivation can only reach its peak if you believe that effort, not ability, is the limiting factor in success.
So attacking these barriers, using Agile, using Agile to your advantage. I'll be the first to admit that personally, I was never a fan of applying Agile to everything. Agile was really popular in software development, startups. I've been part of those. I know why it's successful, but it's obviously a trend now to kind of hack it on to everything that's going on, and it's going to somehow improve that process. Some cases they're right, some cases they're not. But in this situation, we didn't really go out seeking how we could shove Agile into this because that would be a good thing for management to see. It just happened to be that, normal people, we're not Agile masters. We just took some things from it that made sense. And it's actually didn't have a lot of overhead and it reduced our workload and just made perfect sense for the problems that we're dealing with.
So the thing is, we're in a constant state of flux, and Jason alluded to it. We deal with operational pressures. An incident comes up. Your boss sends an email asking for a report on the latest threat actor or something that he read in Newsweek. And we also deal with this constant state of change in terms of the attack profile is constantly shifting as IT evolves and vulnerabilities are introduced to the environment. The threat profile constantly changes as attackers continue to evolve their techniques. And so, we believe that Agile allows us to manage those risks by allowing you to work in small, discrete steps, so that if one of these operational distractions comes along, you don't lose your place where you're at. At worst, you're going to be reprioritizing the work that you didn't do in the next sprint, because it all will stay in the backlog if you weren't able to get to it in the window that you allocated for yourself.
Yeah, so not being Scrum Masters, we try to come up with a way that we could handle this workflow that made the most sense, but it wasn't going to be a burden on the resources to actually execute. And one of the ways that we came up with this is here, but obviously each organization is different, and how you want to go about tackling it is different. You might have different tasks, different projects that you want to create. But the fundamental way that we seem to see that it works is to do development tasks and testing tasks. And obviously testing tasks cover things like execution of individual techniques, as many people have talked about. Development tasks actually capture the outcome of that. So deficiencies that were recognized through the testing of those techniques. And what we call building blocks are essentially the categorization of those deficiencies. So we have things like content, data, model, architecture, and MicroPurple, which we'll get to in a little bit, essentially describes deficiencies in the test itself. But what we're constructing with this is a pool of either MITRE attacks that have been tested or haven't been tested, the deficiencies that we know exist based on the tests that we have done, and then how we've categorized those as either a content issue, so maybe a rule's not working or a playbook's missing, a data issue, there's no log or there's no aggregation source, a model, so there's some kind of analytical problem, and then architecture, maybe we need a solution or something like that. And all of that together is essentially building blocks to let you construct whatever strategy you want based on which tasks you want to focus on given your strategy.
And recognizing that Agile is a thing unto itself, there's many beastly books that have been written about the nuances of it. Our approach was to select only those elements that made sense to us in the context of continuous improvement of our program. And so some of those that we picked, of course, the sprint. The sprint gives us the agility to respond to changes in the threat landscape, as well as insulates us against making mistakes. So if we decide to prioritize a couple of the wrong techniques, at worst, we lost some velocity in terms of chasing the right ones. The other piece that we adopted is the idea of a daily stand-up. And so because it's operational, because it's easy to lose focus, because we know that we like to chase shiny objects, it really helps us to have that daily touch point to come together and re-articulate our commitment to what we're going to be working on that day. We also included the retrospective from Agile. And so at the end of every sprint, we sit down and we talk through what worked, what didn't, and we make adjustments to the process every 2 weeks. So we're improving the process itself. And then the final piece that we adopted is grooming the backlog. And so this, in terms of our build, I can personally say this is probably the most difficult part for us. And we've seen some great presentations so far that have talked about the different approaches that you can apply, where you're able to blend threat intelligence, you're able to blend penetration tests, you're able to blend red team results, all into a prioritization for your backlog of things that you need to build out and improve.
Winning over skeptics. So I'm a skeptic. I'm sure most good people are. That's kind of why we're here, right? We don't trust some of the things people say. We validate them, and then we trust them ourselves. And one of the things you're going to run into, especially if you're pitching a program like this, where we're going to change what we're going to focus on, and we're also going to have you do these agile things, and then 3 months later, you're going to reach, the promised land. That's a difficult thing, especially when you're dealing with technical resources on a blue team who already have things to do. And then this is the extra ask. One of the things that we found that works pretty well is to actually sit down and do some tabletop exercises. I'm sure some of this has already been covered, but you can pick a threat that maybe the organization was subjected to previously, or they may be, and it's a high priority, decompose it into the behaviors, get everybody in a room, figure out, based on those behaviors and these techniques that it represents, what do we have in place? What deficiencies do we think are going to come of that because we can't detect it? Can we respond to it? Can we prevent it through any means? And when you go through that exercise, it's actually very very informing because it takes a long time, which clearly now the understanding of the fact that you need to have something to deal with that and to kind of break it up into smaller pieces becomes true. And then you're also dealing with a lot of data. So you're going to come up with a lot of deficiencies, a lot of answers around, I don't know if that's actually possible or not. And that is really kind of resonating with people as to kind of see why these processes are necessary and why the overhead of doing something like agile, continuous improvement, makes a lot of sense.
So now the second thing that we found effective in helping with the adoption of attack, I think is a common theme that we've heard and we're going to continue to hear is that you should test against the attack framework itself. And the way that we did that was to introduce this concept called micro-purple. Micro-purple is philosophically test-driven development, where the unit tests are bounded by each one of the attack techniques. It provides for us immediate feedback. So when you're writing content, you run the unit test, and then you can refine your content immediately and know if it's working or not. And it also does something interesting to the team, and the team has found it actually pretty fun to be able to put on this hat. And in what they're effectively doing is it's giving the blue team an opportunity to practice red techniques that maybe they normally wouldn't get to perform in their day-to-day jobs.
So to summarize, if you're going to create a micro-purple capability, it's obvious that this has existed at the organization at a higher level, right? You have pen test teams, red teams that are supposed to inform ultimately the blue team to take some sort of input and do something about it to prevent it from happening in the future. We're not trying to replicate that. We're trying to internalize a small piece of that. And the reasons for that is because we need scale. We need to do this over a large amount of things. And we need to do it very, very fast, much faster than a red team or a pen test can execute because they're doing larger campaigns of things. And the things that they're looking at may not even be aligned with things that you're interested in because maybe you already know about them. Now we're focusing on things that we don't know about, but you're getting hit with pen test reports or red team simulations that are just, maybe talking about a vulnerability that they've used 3 times now on you. And that's fine. That needs to exist at a higher level. What we're talking about is compartmentalizing that, internalizing it inside a blue team, which I think naturally people have done as part of the attack matrix. Blue team has been executing these types of tests because that's required to really figure anything out. But if you formalize that and you put process around it and you actually track it, you can really prioritize what you're doing. So we bring it in-house, meaning we have a couple blue team people run these tests. They're not pen testers. They're not being trained to be pen testers. They're just running. They have the skills to run an average pen tester's tool. And you iterate on that across all the techniques that you've assigned to them for a current sprint. It's low sophistication. So we're just talking about the basic technique that would be outlined, in the description from MITRE. And it's low cost because it's very targeted. So instead of hiring a pen tester to pen test the environment and maybe hit some of our areas, we're targeting very specific techniques very quickly, and we're getting feedback to give us that real-time tactical information about the environment. Now, you do all that testing, right? And it's great. You get results. You're tracking it in Jira or whatever tool you're using to do the workflow. You have to provide context around that. And with the MITRE attack matrix, you impulsively want to say, because this is possible and because we have this ability to detect that technique, now we can detect that technique. And making a blanket statement like that is dangerous, right? Because any small iteration of that you're not aware of may work. So you need to qualify the test that was done. And the best way to qualify that is really using metrics. And what those metrics capture is up to you, up to your organization, but you want to capture basic things like complexity and prevention, right? Because what sophistication do you believe you actually detected that? What sophistication level is required to overcome that? So while you're doing testing rapidly through micro-purple, that is your opportunity to capture the metrics that you need about each test as you go through matrix or whatever techniques have been prioritized.
Now, the metrics themselves are interesting because they have the obvious use of being used to prioritize the work that we do. So the metrics feed back into this continuous improvement cycle. But what I found is that there's two other use cases for metrics that are very helpful in the adoption. The first is that the team is excited about the metrics themselves, because now we finally have a way to articulate to other people what it is we do all day, what value we're bringing to the organization, and we can do that in a very rigorous and defined way. The second thing that I found is the metrics themselves serve as a bridge to other people who maybe aren't versed in attack, aren't versed in information security. And so I was given a presentation on our approach to our management all hands. And at the end of the presentation, one of the vice presidents came up to me. He goes, I like what you're doing, but it really came together for me when you showed me the heat map, when you showed me the metrics slide that explained the outcome that you guys were looking for. That's when I understood, and that's when I got it. And that's why I'm behind what you guys are doing.
So as far as metrics goes, there's a lot of options here. I mean, you can come up with a lot of different attributes that you want to capture. We stuck with detection, prevention, and response. We're not going to get too far in the weeds here about all the different features that you could come up with. But what I will say is measuring prevention is interesting and dangerous at the same time, because you always want to have context around complexity, right? Because any one of your detective measures or preventative measures can be overcome with resources and time. Like that's what we're in the business of, right? We spend money on something, threat actor spends more money, they win. You need to capture that.
So now this question is interesting, right? Could this happen to us? And I'm always reminded of the way that that we used to get this done is, somebody would read about something in a newspaper, and we'd take a look at the attack, and we'd look at the different components that the attack was described. And for each one of those components, we'd figure out if we had a control in place that we thought would work against that component of the attack. The attack used malware. Well, we've got anti-malware. Check. And we'd go through and we'd knock down all the different pillars of whatever was described in the newspaper article. And then once we had knocked them all down, we reported back to executive leadership. There's no way this could happen here.
Exactly. And I think we're all familiar with that kind of question, right? You can rephrase it as, are we vulnerable to whatever? The question comes from leadership or whoever based on the news outlet that they watch and the time of day. It's usually they're coming in the morning or or late at night when someone sees something and they want to know, okay, what's the state of the program? Is this going to happen to us? And when you look at the process, when you do the micropurple testing, you capture the metrics, you track the workflow, and you prioritize the issues that make the most sense to you and that are highest priority to you while juggling your operations, you can answer that question in an intelligent way. And for the longest time in security, that's never been possible. Until now, until you've had a finite space like the MITRE ATT&CK matrix, and you've had a way to prioritize what you're working on and capture real metrics. Now you can answer that question and say, well, are we vulnerable to this threat? Let's decompose it into the behaviors and techniques. Let's see if we've tested that. What are the metrics we have? And if they're good, then yeah, we believe that this threat exhibits these behaviors. Therefore, we're comfortable that we're covered. Now, if you haven't tested it or you don't have good metrics for that particular behavior that the threat's exhibiting, you can also make a statement around, we can't do this, but maybe if we invested in technology or any of those areas that could help us in detection or prevention, we could detect that. And by the way, we could also detect these other threats. And it makes your discussion around investments and things like that very powerful. So through this process, being able to answer that question with real data is one of the most promising things.
Which is just awesome, right? We see the tremendous potential in the attack framework and all of its applications, but we also recognize that there's some significant barriers to adoption in our respective organizations, and there's effort that goes into bringing it in and making it an integral part of your program. We believe that Agile combined with attack gives you a systematic and incremental way to manage some of those risks, not just the cultural ones, but also the operational risks that sap away at the hours that we have to give to this problem every day. But we hope that in sharing our experiences that you're able to have a fantastic journey with attack as well. And thank you all.
Thank you.
thank you, Matt and Jason. And so now we just have a couple. I don't believe we have time for questions.
No,
if that's okay.
All good.
You can all catch up with us over lunch. It's okay.
All right, so we'll now be taking a lunch break here in McLean until about 1:30, at which time we'll resume our live event coverage. So during lunch, you get another opportunity to vote. You can still vote on the last question, which was the least likely to appear in the wild technique. Use a red pin for that. But now you can use a blue pin to vote on the answer to this question: which of your attack mapped detections generate the most false positives? So which are the noisiest? Speaking of lunch, we have a number of options out there. There are tables that have prepackaged salads, sandwiches, vegetarian sushi. Grab your lunch, visit the exhibitors, go talk to John Wonder about and get interviewed about attack. And just a reminder that we are taking photos for social media, so expect to be photographed. We're starting up again at 1:30 here, so please be back by then. Enjoy your lunch.
Sean, I'm going to read this.
Grab this. Oh, yep, I realized I still left
We have a potential creation typos in this slide. I'm going to take a picture real quick. Sure. I'm very apologetic about it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So here's the thing.